Good morning. I believe we should start the meeting.
Yes, I think we should.
Good morning.
Yes. Could we kindly proceed? Is there? Dennis?
Madam SJ, I'm around.
Is there a reason why we are still waiting?
Not really, we can proceed.
Kindly guide us so we may proceed. May you please flag the program if need be and assist us.
Madam SG, maybe if Mr. Ronald can help me sharing it on the.
Okay, just a minute, Dennis, I'll share it now.
Mr. Ronald.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, maybe if you can please assist sharing in beaming the program.
We'll do so.
Okay. Ronald, maybe if you can increase this font. Yes, this page. Just a little bit.
Is that okay, Dennis?
Yeah, it's clear. I don't know if it's clear too, but I can see it.
Honorable members, good morning. I believe it is opportune for us to start the meeting. We have the program flagged on the screen as presented. Allow me to indicate the following. The presentation that was supposed to be done by Ms. Eva Jala will not be taking place as the drafter was unable to join us in this meeting. We'll therefore proceed to discuss the issues of data trends on child marriages in Southern Africa. We'll also receive a presentation from UNFPA and UNICEF on the global program to end child marriages. Then we'll proceed to have a plenary discussion on the two presentations and any other advancements that our countries have done. We'll take a break for at least 20 minutes. This is important because our interpreters also need a break and we also need a health break. If we sit too long in these Zoom meetings, we end up not being able to be as productive as we'd like to be. Then we'll proceed to session 2, where we'll receive a presentation from ARASA on the status of the TRICS traceabilities in the region. We'll have a plenary discussion related to that, and we'll proceed to have a presentation on the role of parliamentarians in advancing access to COVID-19 vaccine, medicines, and diagnostic. This will be given by ARASA and SAPAM. Then we'll proceed to have a plenary discussion on the same and pull out issues for consideration, or that we want to resolve for the consideration of the plenary assembly. Honorable members, with that being the case, allow me to request for any additions to the agenda. If we have none, kindly request for 2 countries, one to move for the adoption of the agenda and the other country to move as a seconder for the adoption of the agenda. I thank you, honorable members.
South Africa moves to the agenda.
Thank you, Honorable Tengwe. South Africa has moved for the adoption of the agenda. May we kindly have
Malawi second.
Thank you, Honorable.
Malawi seconded.
Thank you, Honorable Namasheka. We appreciate the agenda is adopted accordingly. May you kindly remove the agenda from the screen, Dennis, and I'll proceed to briefly give remarks. Honorable members.
SG, the name is Namachekecha.
Namachekecha. Ziko Kwambiri.
That's right, yes.
Namachekecha. I apologize for that, Honorable. Yes, I will commit that to memory. Honorable members, chairpersons of the various committees, colleagues from parliaments, colleagues from civil society organizations, in particular the executive secretaries for SAFAIDS, SAPAM, and ARASA, welcome to this important meeting. Honorable members, as you are well aware, the model law on eradicating child marriages and protecting children already in marriage is one of the huge achievements of the SADC Parliamentary Forum legislatures. This was one of the model laws that was considered as a groundbreaking piece of legislation. It is a model law that was adopted and considered by all standing committees of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, including some committees at national level. We received very valuable inputs from all SADC countries, and we believe that this is a piece of legislation that we should continue to treasure and follow in terms of the commitment to ensure that the necessary processes which have been recommended are taken on board by our countries. Honorable members, currently the model law continues to receive a lot of attention continentally and internationally. However, the adoption of certain components of the model laws require us to continue to add a voice on the issues. We need to take our commitment and the momentum a step further in ensuring that we do not continue to see children who are married before they attain the age of 18 years old. We have done a snapshot survey as a SADC Parliamentary Forum as part of a process of gathering data in terms of how far our member states are in respecting the issue set for the minimum age of marriage to be at 18 years old. We are also following up on services that our governments need to mount in order to deal with the married laws that are conflicting regarding this issue of protecting children in marriage. We're also working with customs and religious organizations. And we are also working with organizations that are working with children who find themselves in the context of violence, especially girls. And we are hoping that through some of these steps, we'll be able to engender knowledge and be able to impart the spirit and letter of the model law. Honorable members, in reviewing the related articles in this model law, it is important for you as representatives of the people to position yourself to shape and advance a robust legal and policy framework for preventing child marriages. This is the promise that honorable members made in adopting this model law. We need to take it a step further to ensure that what has been adopted at the regional level is also adopted at the country level, so that the spirit of this model law is not lost. We must ensure that our countries do not lower the standards set in this model law. We must push and work with the executive to ensure that legislation and policies on education, on access to health services, on birth registration and marriages, among others, are aligned with the model law. We must use our oversight and accountability roles to ensure that there is enough budget allocated for the protection of our girls, that we monitor implementation of these laws and policies on gender equality, on education, on access to health services, most importantly, sexual reproductive health and rights, which all contribute to eradicating child marriages. We must ensure accountability, both national and international commitments are there that should back us up. Honorable members, throughout this joint session, I believe that the presentations and collaborations that we've had with partners like UNFPA, SAFES, ARASA, UNAIDS, African Union, among others, will basically move us to the next step. And we must echo the sentiments of the slogan of Nike that we can do it and we must do it. Obviously, beyond commitment, if we don't do more, we will not be able to serve our constituents accordingly. I appeal to you today that as we engage with the presenters and as we share experiences from our countries, we must begin to think about what strategies do we want to take on board for domestication at national level to be effective. We must play a part as members of parliament. We must ensure that we are adopting instruments that should become a reality for our children. With these few remarks, honorable members, I wish to thank you for your time and wish you a fruitful deliberation. Having said that, Mr. Gondo, you're supposed to be the master of ceremonies. Could you kindly take us through the program? Now I'm speaking and moving on like that, which is not in order. Or have you been able to request our chairpersons to take over this process?
Yeah, Madam SG, in terms of a program, at this point in time,
we cannot hear you, Mr. Gondwe.
Hello,
yes,
Madam
please.
SG and honorable members. At this point in time, Madam SG having delivered remarks, I would like to call upon the chairperson for HSNDP to make some brief remarks in terms of opening the joint session. Thank you.
And maybe before we do that, could you kindly give us any housekeeping issues related to the recording of this meeting and any others?
In terms of the arrangements, Madam SG.
Honourable members, can you hear Mr. Gondwe? I'm struggling.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Okay.
We can hear him.
Okay.
In terms of housekeeping matters, the session is being actually recorded live on YouTube. And also we have a rapporteur who will be taking down the notes and recording. And at the end of the day, we expect to have a report for the joint session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonde. Honorable members, I also wish to advise you that this is a live recording, which is currently being aired on YouTube. We are also going to air the same meeting through the DSTV channel 408 at a later stage. We therefore request honorable members that you fix your cameras to ensure that we can see at least your passport size photo image. What will come out is exactly what will be happening in the committee meeting. To avoid any issues of anti-decorum, if there's such a word, kindly be mindful that you are being recorded and this is live. Thank you, honorable members. So we are requested to keep our cameras on at all times, especially when taking the floor. Kindly identify yourself and the country you represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam SG. And let me call upon the Honorable Chairperson for HNDB to make her remarks. I would request her to be somehow brief, looking at the timelines. We are a little behind schedule. Thank you, Madam SG and honorable members.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Bertha Mackenzie Ndebele, MP from Malawi and chairperson of HSDSP. Honorable members, the Secretary General, SADC-PF, distinguished resource persons from UNFPA, UNICEF, and ARASA, SAPAM, and members of Secretariat. Honorable members, it is my singular honor to stand before you this morning to make a statement for the opening of the joint session of standing committees for the SADC Parliamentary Forum. Honorable members, as you are all aware, one of the guiding principles of SADC-PF is to promote a culture of human rights within SADC, which includes the enjoyment of sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, for all, without discrimination. Today, the evidence base is strong that achievement of universal SRHR produces multiple dividends, in particular gender dividend, youth dividend, also known as demographic dividend, and human capital dividend. These dividends are crucial for attaining the SDGs and more equitable, just, prosperous, and sustainable world. It is against this background that this meeting has been organized so that members of the forum, through a joint session, get acquainted with some of the efforts that are being employed by the forum and partners in order to achieve the above mentioned mandate. Honorable members, the SADC-PF, in conjunction with partners such as UNFPA and UNICEF, formulated the model law on eradicating child marriages in the region with purpose of curbing instances of child marriage in the region. I am glad to note that during this meeting, we will have an opportunity through presentations from experts to get background information on the model law, be informed of valuable new resources on the SADC model law and related child marriage publications, and on the progress in terms of implementation of the SADC model law by member states. I would like also to make this opportunity to urge each one of us to take keen interest and check how the law is being implemented in our respective countries, taking into account that the region is still registering increased instances of child marriages. Honorable members, it is it is worthwhile to note that COVID-19 pandemic is disrupting efforts to fight child marriages in the region. A 2020 study by UNFPA and partners estimated that an additional 13 million child marriage cases may occur due to disruptions of programs to prevent child marriage. It is therefore important that as members of parliaments in the region, through parliamentary interventions, work towards mitigating the impact of COVID-19 in the fight against child marriages. Honorable members, in the second part of the meeting, we will review the progress that has been made by SADC member states in efforts to review, revise, and install progressive intellectual property patent laws and national policies. The session will look at progress made during the period 2012 to 2020 to advance enabling IP, patent, legislative, and regulatory environments for the improvement of access to essential pharmaceutical medicine and diagnostics, and present an update of the breaking IP barriers, creating pathways to medicine access, SADC member states snapshot, report on the status of TRIPS flexible publication presented to SADC PF in 2018 by ARASA and SAPAM. We will also look at the role of Parliament in advancing access to COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, and diagnostics. Most countries in the region have embarked on process to roll out COVID vaccines to the general population. It is therefore important that as members of Parliament do discuss the process involved in rolling out the vaccines to make sure that the processes are inclusive and transparent. Honorable members, there are a number of presentations from experts that will be made to us. Let us be attentive and listen to our distinguished resource persons. At this juncture, let me declare the meeting opened. I thank you, honorable members.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members, honorable chairpersons. At this point in time, let's proceed into the presentations. I would like to call upon our colleagues from UNFPA to make the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. My name is Anandita Philippos. I'm speaking to you from the UNFPA Eastern Southern Regional Office. I am the Youth and Gender Specialist with the UNFPA Regional Office covering Eastern Southern Africa. And I currently manage the global program to end child marriage, from which we'll be presenting some of our studies and resources. I'll be joined in this presentation by my colleague Mona Akai from the UNICEF SRO office, who will introduce herself when it comes to her turn in the presentation that we're going to make jointly. I want to start by thanking you very much for giving us this opportunity to join you today to speak about this really important issue of child marriage, particularly in the very challenging circumstances we find ourselves in. First of all, I really want to thank Ms. Segoma, the Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, for extending the invitation to us, and also a big thank you to the chairpersons of the standing committees for allowing us the space today to speak to you about the issue of child marriage. And finally, a big thank you to all the honorable members of parliament who have joined us today. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate the time you're taking to be with us, also because it's your actions on the ground that can advance the policies and legislation that we need to really move on the issue of child marriage. And then finally, we cannot do this work without the partnership of our civil society organizations, and a huge thank you to them as well. So with no further ado, I will share my screen. Please do let me know when you're able to see it. Okay. I believe you would be able to see my screen at this stage. Today, we're speaking to you about the urgency, why this is so important for continued investments in child marriage in the COVID-19 context, and the role of the SADC model law on child marriage. In the opening statements, we heard from the honorable member, as well as the Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, about how critical it is that we continue to work on this issue in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the role that the SADC model law continues to play in order for us to do so. I wanted to start with a presentation about a publication that we did last year. And you'll see on the screen, that is the cover of the publication that we did, which was called Child Marriage in COVID-19 Context, Disruptions, Alternative Approaches, and Building Program Resilience. COVID-19 has upended the lives of children and family across the globe and adversely affected programs to end child marriage. We've seen huge disruptions to the lives that we have. Last year, for example, a number of schools across the region closed, impacting young people and ensuring that they stayed at home, which also meant that a lot of their vulnerabilities towards issues such as child marriage and teenage pregnancies deepened. We also saw disruptions to our life-saving services, whether those were health services, social protection services, or other kind of services that we really needed to reach the most vulnerable adolescent girls among us. In the opening statement, the Honorable Chairperson spoke about a 2020 study that was done by UNFPA that looked at the short-term and long-term impacts of lockdowns and COVID-19 on programming and on child marriages. And this study said that COVID-19 will disrupt efforts to end child marriage and could potentially result in an additional 13 million child marriages taking place between 2020 and 2030. And this, of course, also means that the sustainable development goal that we have on child marriage risks not being attained because of the setbacks we've experienced in the current context. We developed this brief together because what we wanted to share with partners was to ensure that the work that we do continues, even in the context of these disruptions and even in the midst of a global pandemic. And that is because vulnerability of adolescent girls continues even in this context. And it's important for us to ensure that the spotlight stays on the issue of child marriage, even while we are grappling with the response to the global pandemic as well. And we also wanted to look ahead and say, how can we ensure we build program resilience so that child marriage programming, child marriage policies, and child marriage legislation are not adversely impacted by these kind of disruptions in the future. We had several recommendations in the document, and at the end of our presentation, we'll share with you the links to these publications that you can read on our websites. And the recommendations included strengthening an integrated approach to end child marriage. And that means you have health interventions, social protection interventions, and education interventions to end child marriage. And what is really powerful about the SADC model law is that it actually really clearly advocates for this integrated approach and shows how parliamentarians and partners can put in policies and legislation in place that ensures this integrated approach can move ahead. Also, another key recommendation that's emerged and that is important for us as actors in the space working on child marriage is to ensure that child marriage is integrated in our COVID-19 response and recovery plans. If child marriage is not seen as an urgent issue that needs to be put as part of these plans, it will not get the kind of attention, the kind of resources, and the kind of investments it needs to really make a difference. I also wanted to share with you another publication that was put out last year. And this is UNFPA's flagship publication called State of the World Population. Every year, we present a new State of the World Population that has a different theme to it. Last year's one, which was very timely, was really looking at the harmful practices that affect women and girls and undermine the achievement of equality. It was called Against My Will, and it looked particularly at practices of child marriage, female genital mutilation, and harmful sex selection. What this publication told us was that when a girl is married, her schooling usually ends. Her life completely changes. She moves from a young girl who's going into school to a young person who's now in a marriage, maybe not of her choosing, and also because childbearing would then start in the context of this child marriage. Her opportunities to be educated, to be empowered, to hold a job, to make the choice about who she marries and how many children she has evaporate, and doors to the future slam shut. Now, if you look at the legislation around the world, in most countries, there is some kind of legislation that bans child marriage. There are loopholes in many contexts, either customary laws that allow loopholes, allow child marriages, or loopholes in the national legislation itself. And this underscores what Ms. Boemo said in the opening statement, that we need to keep the focus on SADC model law. We need to rise to the standards that it sets in really making sure that the policy and legislations we have are strong and robust and multi-sectorial. Child marriages continue to happen 33,000 times a day, every day, all across the world. And this cuts across countries, cultures, religions, and ethnicities. In our region, in Eastern Southern Africa, 32% of girls are married before their 18th birthday. That's 1 in 3 girls. So as part of the urgency of the work that we do around child marriage, the regional directors for UNFPA, Dr. Julita Onabanjo, and the regional director for UNICEF, Mr. Mustafa Fall, put out a joint opinion editorial this year that got a lot of attention. It was published on International Women's Day and was picked up by several media outlets because it said, what is the urgent action we need to meet the SDG to end child marriage by 2030? Later in the presentation, my colleague Mona will speak to you about the global program to end child marriage and the 5th year celebrations we're planning for this year. And this joint op-ed was within the context of the series of actions we have planned for this year as part of the 5th year anniversary. So what has happened is that the evolving COVID-19 pandemic has led UNFPA and UNICEF to explore new and innovative approaches and partnerships to ensure that the work that we do does not stop and that no girl is left behind. So I mentioned the disruptions earlier. We looked at those disruptions and said, how can we reprogram and readjust our work to ensure that we continue to reach the most left behind and vulnerable? Here are 2 examples from Mozambique and Uganda, but they're examples across the region. In Mozambique, young people came together with CSOs and government to create a mini drama of 6 episodes that address COVID-19 issues. It was broadcast widely to a range of young people, and it had messaging on COVID-19, child marriage, and gender-based violence, giving them actions that they can take to end these issues or mitigate the impact, as well as to give them more information to help them also protect themselves. In Uganda, we knew the criticality of continuing social services, particularly for our vulnerable adolescent girls who were in many cases out of school, maybe already married or at the risk of marriage, and may already be an adolescent mother. So we ensure that the parasocial workers had mobile phones and data in order to be able to call the girls and continue the one-on-one interactions to lower their vulnerability. Our message and the message of the op-ed was girls need to be able to hope and aspire to a bright future, a future where they are leaders who can challenge gender bias themselves and lead the change for a more gender equal world. I'll stop here and hand over to my colleague Mona to take us through some of the data, trends, and analysis on child marriage. Over to you, Mona.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anandita. A very good morning to all of you honorable members of the SADC Parliamentarian Forum. My name is Mona Aika, and I'm a child protection specialist working for UNICEF Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Office, and I'm managing the UNFPA UNICEF Global Programs on Ending Child Marriage. I'd like to start the presentation by sharing with you some of the key facts and figures on child marriage. The global number of child marriage is estimated at 650 million, including girls below age of 18 who are already married, and adult women who married in childhood. South Asia is still home to the largest number of child brides, with 285 million child brides, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa with 115 million child brides. This overall is estimated to have 12 million girls being married at childhood each year. And as it has been presented by my colleague Anandita, the COVID-19 situation also exacerbated this, the rates of child marriage. I would like now to project the statistics of the countries in Eastern and Southern Africa region. We have, if you can go to the next slide, yeah, thank you. We have Mozambique with the highest rates at 48% of women aged 20 to 24 years old married before the age of 18, followed by Uganda and Ethiopia at 40% and Zambia at 31%. Similarly, in Mozambique also, it leads together with Ethiopia to have high rates of women married by age of 18 to be at 14%, followed by Uganda at 10%, Zambia and 6%, and Kenya 4%. The next slide that is going to be projected here is really, I wanted to share with you some of the preliminary results of an analysis being carried out by UNICEF data and analytics colleagues to really show and using the latest comparable data on the situation of child marriage overall. You will see that the Eastern and Southern Africa region is home to 2 of the top 10 countries in the world, with Mozambique at 53% of women aged 20 to 24 who reported to be married before the age of 18. And similarly to in South Sudan, the rate is 52%. So this really is showing that our region needs to be able to take action and address this, the concern of child marriage. Looking now more specifically at the situation of child marriage in the SADC region, there are approximately 1 in 3 of all girls aged 20 to 24 married before their 18th birthday. There are also large variation that exist of child marriage rates within the countries. For example, looking at Mozambique, 1 in 2 girls are married before the age of 18, and zooming in at a particular province, Nampula, more than 3 in 5 girls are married before the age of 18, and nearly 1 in 5 girls are married before the age of 15. We know the rates of child marriage have decreased in many countries across the world and also in the region in the last decade, most particularly. And the decrease is noted for the age group of children before the age of 15. We also know that the population increases every year, and this has exceeded the progress made, leading to a growth in number of girls being married. So even though we're making progress, but then the population still increases, so we need to accelerate our efforts. We also know that adolescent girls face multiple vulnerabilities, from child marriage, teen pregnancies, violence, vulnerabilities to HIV transmission, all of which, as we all know, have been exacerbated in the COVID-19 pandemic. Honorable members, this is a call to action for all of us to address child marriage. Now I'll proceed and give a little introduction of the UNFPA UNICEF Global Program. The UNFPA UNICEF Global Program in 2016 was launched to end child marriage in 12 countries with high prevalence and or high burden of child marriage, starting with Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia in this region, Ghana, India, Mozambique in this region, Nepal, Niger, Sierra Leone, Uganda in this region, Yemen, and Zambia. And this global program works in 3 phases. The program aims to address complex social, cultural, and structural factors that underpin the practice of child marriage, with the goal of ending the practice by 2030, in line with the Sustainable Development Goal 5.3 of eliminating all harmful practices. On the right-hand side, I've highlighted some of the strategies and achievements made globally. One of the strategies is looking at empowering adolescent girls at risk and affected by child marriage. And here so far we've had 6.6 million adolescent girls reached through life skills and education support. The global program also supports communities for gender equitable attitudes and behavior. And so far we have reached 11 million community members. The global program on ending child marriage also ensures health, education, protection, and other systems are responsive to the needs of girls. And we have 31,417 service delivery points have improved their services for adolescent girls. And the main reason for this meeting today, the global program is also aims to support governments on legal and policy frameworks. And so far across the world, we have 11 countries out of 12 global program countries have national strategies addressing child marriage, out of which 6 are budgeted for, something that was also highlighted in the introduction as a need to accelerate action on. And we also focus on strengthening data and evidence. And so far, we have about 74 studies produced to inform programming and policy making, which also really helps us to have evidence-based interventions in the programming. The next slide is really summarizing the key strategies used in the global program, which I've just mentioned, and really focusing more on the supporting governments in creating positive legal and policy environment in relation to child marriage. And this also is also showing that we have a need to take action. We need to take action when it comes to empowering the adolescent girls who are at risk of child marriage, working with the families and communities to promote positive behaviors towards girls and their rights, and ensuring health, education, protection, and other systems are responsive to the needs of and the demand of the girl. And again, the law environment also needs to be friendly to the girl child, and use and build the data and evidence on what works to end child marriage and harmful practices. So now I'd like to stop here and pass the floor to my colleague Anandita to take us through the SADC model law and way to wed videos. Over to you, Anandita.
Thank you so much, Mona. Mona gave a very comprehensive overview of the global program to end child marriage. And as she mentioned, we do this program in phases. We're currently in the 2nd phase of the global program to end child marriage, and we're very excited of the progress we had made in the first one. We also want to take the opportunity this year, because it's been 5 years since the global program started, to really celebrate the achievements we have and then look ahead and say how much further do we have to go. And so this year is the 5th anniversary of the global program to end child marriage. UNFPA and UNICEF are planning a virtual commemoration of the 5 years of the global program towards the end of this year, in October this year. And we'll be reaching out to parliamentarians and other partners to sort of share the stories and the experiences of the results you've seen, as well as the feedback you have for us on what more needs to be done to advance child marriage issues. And so this is something that we're very excited about, and we will share more details as it emerges. Right now, I wanted to speak a little bit more also about how we partner with you, with parliamentarians, with the Parliamentary Forum for legal and policy reform on child marriage over the years. One of the things that Mona also presented was the support for development of costed action plans. In our region, we have those action plans in several countries, including Ethiopia, Mozambique, South Sudan, Madagascar, Uganda, and Zambia. And so this is a very powerful tool for us to advance the work on child marriage, as long as we can ensure that implementation and budgeting is adequate. On this slide, you can see a screenshot of the cover of the guide on how we use the SADC model law to eradicate child marriage and protect children already in marriage. SADC PF, SADC Parliamentary Forum, led this process, and we worked together with them, together with parliamentarians, civil society organizations, and young people to put together this guide on how the SADC model law can actually be used in countries and in action. We provided support for the establishment of an oversight committee to strengthen oversight and accountability for implementation of model laws, which we think is a very powerful tool to really ensure that the model laws are applied and domesticated. And then finally, we've seen the direct impact of how countries have used the SADC model law to really push legal and policy reform and ensure a more comprehensive response to child marriage in several countries in our region. And then finally, last year, UNFPA, together with SADC Parliamentary Forum, UNICEF, and Girls Not Brides came together to develop a series of animated videos and comics on the SADC model law on child marriage. And the reason we did this was because we heard from partners, including from parliamentarian partners, that while the SADC model law was a very powerful tool, the layperson and a lot of other partners may not know it very well and needed a sort of visually appealing, quick overview that would appeal to a large range of audiences who would then become familiar with the SADC model law and how they can use it and how it can protect them and young girls. And so we developed this series of animated videos, and later in the presentation, I will play one of the videos for parliamentarians, for all of you to see, and to also understand how you can use it in your countries. Before I do that, I wanted to share a case study on how a country has used the SADC model law to actually advance legislation on child marriage. And this is just one case study. I know there's several honorable MPs in the room who have actually used the SADC model law in your countries as well. And I'll be very interested to hear from you about your experiences on work that you have already done, as well as work that you would plan to do using the SADC model law and building on this. Similarly, I'm presenting from the Mozambique example here, and if there's MPs from the Mozambique context as well who want to share their experiences, we would really welcome it at the end of this presentation. So the government of Mozambique had strong support from civil society, UN agencies, and donors to review what was called the National Family Law. And the reason they wanted to do that was to set the minimum age of marriage at 18 years with no exceptions. A task force was established in August 2017 to draft a separate law on child marriage. And what is really critical here is that they use the SADC model law as a reference. And to go back to what Ms. Segoma said at the beginning, as the gold standard for the kind of legislation and policy we want to see on child marriage. The draft law therefore provided integrated protection for children against early marriages, premature marriages, and it included civil, criminal, and procedural aspects. It criminalized informal unions and created sanctions and accountability for associated acts. And it looked at both the eradication of child marriage as well as the protection of children who are already in child marriages. The draft law was approved by Parliament in July 2019 as the Prevention and Combat of Premature Unions Act. So this is a very powerful example that we can see of how the SADC model law was used in a real context to affect change and move legislation. Having said that, I'll now show you the videos. The first, the whole series of videos is called Wait for Wed to Wed, and it's about ending child marriage in Southern Africa. And you'll see here a still from our videos that's called How Can the Law Help? ending child marriages. And the 4 videos are interlinked, even though they can be shown separately, and really focuses on 2 young legal advocates who talk about the need to have change legislatively and policy-wise to really protect young girls against child marriage and help those who might already find themselves in a child marriage. The Way to Wed series is an advocacy and an awareness tool to end child marriage that was produced in partnership between UNFPA, UNICEF, Girls No Brides, and the SADC Parliamentarian Forum in 2020. It is a 4-part video and a comic book series in which characters utilize the SADC model law to really advocate against child marriage. And what we would really like is to hear from you about how you can use it with your constituencies and to ensure that you bring a larger audience on board in terms of understanding and knowing how this model law can apply to them, to the work they do and the lives they lead. Having said that, I will now present the first video. What we have done is that we've taken the first video and we've added French and Portuguese subtitles. So this first video that I'm going to play has the French subtitles, and then I'll play the same video again with the Portuguese subtitles. Please do let me know if you have any problems with the sound and hearing or seeing the video, which is starting now.
It breaks my heart. They become like property. Some of them are sold off like possessions, like cattle.
But you're right. And in the process, we forget that vital concept, the best interests of the child.
And their human rights, too. They have a right to education and protection from exploitation and abuse.
And importantly, they have every right to protect their sexual and reproductive health and to get access to such health services.
That's a very important point, because I know what happens to these girls. My mother was a child bride. She had me and my sisters when she was basically still a child herself. Just think how difficult her life was and all the opportunities she missed.
I have a school friend who got married off, now at my age, and she's had many pregnancies already. Sure, happy health, but her husband is not giving her any say in the matter.
I'm sorry to ask, but is he violent with her? I mean, often these girls face a higher risk of violent relationships.
Not that I know of. But in that household, she's got very little power to make decisions.
And I bet you her education and health suffered because she had to leave school early.
Sadly, yes. So it's unlikely she'll be able to make a living all on her own.
And what if he decides he's tired of her? He could simply throw her out. We know these girls are far less secure in their marriages and living arrangements. Well, that means we've got our work cut out for us. Education, health, and rights.
Yep. We must champion the SADC model law on eradicating child marriage in every country in the SADC region.
I've looked at it properly, and it explains exactly how and why we need laws and policies on child marriage.
If more countries adopt this law, the lives of so many girls would change. From something like this, to something far better. Doors will literally open for them if waiting to wed until later in life becomes the norm.
By delaying marriage, instead of poverty and insecurity, they could enjoy a life of learning, good health, and personal development.
They can choose if they marry, who they marry, and when they marry. They also can choose to have children and how many.
And have the chance to be employed in a decent job and even work towards a secure old age.
Hey, forget about old age, Vanaka. Think productive life. these women will take their rightful place in society. If culture, law, and tradition enshrined, waiting to wed as the norm.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll now present the exact same video, but with the Portuguese subtitles.
It breaks my heart. They become like property. Some of them are sold off like possessions, like cattle.
But you're right. And in the process, we forget that vital concept, the best interests of the child.
And their human rights too. They have a right to education and protection from exploitation and abuse.
And importantly, they have every right to protect their sexual and reproductive health and to get access to such health services.
That's a very important point, because I know what happens to these girls. My mother was a child bride. She had me and my sisters when she was basically still a child herself. Just think how difficult her life was and all the opportunities she missed.
I have a school friend who got married off, now at my age, and she's had many pregnancies already. Sure, happy health, but her husband is not giving her any say in the matter.
I'm sorry to ask, but is he violent with her? I mean, often these girls face a higher risk of violent relationships.
Not that I know of, but in that household, she's got very little power to make decisions.
And I bet you her education and health suffered because she had to leave school early.
Sadly, yes. So it's unlikely she'll be able to make a living all on her own.
And what if he decides he's tired of her? He could simply throw her out. We know these girls are far less secure in their marriages and living arrangements. Well, that means we've got our work cut out for us. Education, health, and rights.
Yup. We must champion the SADC model law on eradicating child marriage in every country in the SADC region.
I've looked at it properly, and it explains exactly how and why we need laws and policies on child marriage.
If more countries adopt this law, the lives of so many girls would change. From something like this, to something far better. Doors will literally open for them if waiting to wed until later in life becomes the norm.
By delaying marriage, instead of poverty and insecurity, they could enjoy a life of learning, good health, and personal development.
They can choose if they marry, who they marry, and when they marry. They also can choose to have children and how many.
And have the chance to be employed in a decent job and even work towards a secure old age.
Hey, forget about old age, Vanaka. Think productive life. These women will take their rightful place in society. If culture, law, and tradition enshrined, waiting to wed as the norm.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Those were the two videos that we showed. I would now like to hand over to my colleague Mona to present some of the other regional resources we have and then to close the session. Over to you, Mona.
Thank you very much, Anandita. Watching that video again really emphasized the need for us to take action and accelerate our efforts to end child marriage. Dear members of, honorable members of the Parliamentarian Forum, the SADC Parliamentarian Forum, the UNFPA, and the UNICEF Global Program on Ending Child Marriage, as mentioned earlier, has been implemented in Eastern and Southern Africa since 2016. And as it was mentioned earlier by Anandita, we'll be celebrating 5 years anniversary of the program this year. And that will be an opportunity for us to showcase the achievements made, but still also highlight the need to accelerate action to end child marriage by 2030. We have numerous resources available under the Global Program on Ending Child Marriage, but here we've identified a few of the regional resources for you to be able to make reference on. Starting off with the first bullet point is highlighting the technical note that was written by UNICEF and UNFPA that Anandita presented earlier, showcasing the challenges COVID-19 has brought and some of the solutions that need to be taken moving forward. And then the next 4 bullet points are links, active links to the Weight to Weight video. Episode 1 is on the SADC model law and how the law can help. Episode 2 is on what SADC model law is all about. Episode 3 is what can I do or what can we do to promote the use of SADC model law. And episode 4 is on promoting SADC model law through parliamentarian action. So these will be available for you to take a look after and throughout your work. There's also a link on the State of the World report, which also Anandita mentioned during her presentation, and also a U report on child marriage. Basically, U report is a messaging tool that empowers young people around the world to engage with and speak out on issues that matter to them. We've attached a questionnaire on the child marriage that was used in Uganda, and for us, that enabled us to get the views of young people on child marriage during the times of the pandemic. And lastly, is another link on the on the regional guidelines for developing child protection budget brief, which provides step-by-step processes that a country can take to have a look at government budgets and see how much is being allocated towards interventions related to all matters concerning child protection, but more specifically, there is a theme on ending child marriage. So this is really encouraging the countries within our region to develop budget briefs to know the actual situation of the budget allocation and call to action for increased allocation on activities that contribute to ending child marriage. With that, I thank you all very much for listening to us, and would like to welcome the moderator to take us through the question and answers. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson and honorable members, Honorable Ndewere, you have to moderate the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, honorable members. Allow me to thank our presenters for the very informative presentations and also the short videos that clearly showed us the effects of early child marriage. I'm sure after watching those short videos, all of us were touched, and we are in agreement of the discussions of the two young people on the importance of providing education to our girl child, and also the challenges that the girl child that marries early will face in the marriage. Now we are going to have a discussion for 30 minutes on what our presenters have presented and on what we have watched on the videos. So I'll be picking 3 members, a set of 3 members. When you speak, you give questions Then we'll give it to the presenters to respond to your questions or your recommendations. All right, I can see, I see South Africa, I see Zambia. Who else? Seychelles. All right, so we are going to start with South Africa, then followed by Zambia, then we come to Seychelles, then we give it back to our presenters, then I'll pick another set of 3 questions. Thank you so much, honorable members. Zambia, I recognize you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the great presentation. I just wanted to find out, in terms of the research that went into the videos that you made, I know that when it came to research on crime videos, they went into how race would play a part in the videos. So if you kept on showing a certain demographic of person in the crime video, people would believe that it's only a certain race of person that commits a crime. And I would suggest then that if you keep on showing a certain race or religion in terms of young girl-child marriages, that maybe people in Africa might believe, well, it can only happen to a certain race of person that these young girl marriages could happen to. Now in Africa, we're seeing that, of course, it's not just one race or one demographic or one religion that this can happen to. So, well, you know, what would research show, your research show, in terms of broadening that? So, you know, I would hate to get to show this to one, you know, to one audience, and they turn around and say, "But why are you showing it to us? Because it doesn't affect us," or you know, as you say, how do you say, "But this is our problem because it affects everyone, regardless of you know, race, religion, or whatever the cause?" And as I said, you know, when the research that was shown in terms of crime, you know, we were shown that it must be inclusive, you know, that we must be able to, regardless of the majority of people that were victimized, we must be able to be more inclusive in the video, so that no one felt victimized or no one felt intimidated by virtue of the video. Thank you.
Thank you so much, South Africa, for raising that very important observation. It is true that this is happening to all the races, and I hope our presenters and researchers have taken note of that. We now go to Zambia.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me an opportunity to provide an intervention. First of all, I must thank the presenter, indeed, for giving us the data that we need in order to engage in meaningful dialogue. Madam Presenter and moderator, it's a known fact that most people are aware about the model law, SADC model law on ending child marriage. And they know the key deliverables, that indeed the model law is about according the child access to education, access to health services, and also getting to know their rights. And I'm aware that one of the entry points, if we have to achieve this, is actually through comprehensive sexuality education. Moderator, it's very, very unfortunate that in Zambia, we have a heated debate on whether to continue with comprehensive sexuality education or not. There are different schools of thoughts. And unfortunately, some of the people who would like the comprehensive sexuality education suspended are paid up stakeholders. Others are coming from the church. So this brings me to an issue of whether indeed we have deployed an appropriate approach for creating awareness on the SADC model and indeed other interventions that accompany the model. So I'd like to find out, probably from the presenters, what they feel about the approaches that we have been deploying in order to make people, or indeed various stakeholders, aware about the SADC models and the deliverables that we need to achieve. I think that is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zambia, for that question. And I hope our presenters have taken note of the question. And I also want to applaud you for bringing that question of deploy, if we have really deployed Secretariat, can we the background noise? Secretariat. Can you mute? Can you mute?
Kindly mute. Kindly mute.
Thank you so much. We now go to Seychelles. Seychelles.
Hi. Good afternoon, madam. Okay, first of all, I would like to make some comment about the presentation we have this morning. And to continue, I'm Richard from Seychelles. And I have some queries regarding all the presentation we had this morning, especially since this, especially around Africa, regarding child marriage. What after all of this meeting, do we have a follow-up? Is it a discussion that we're going to keep on, or if it's something that in general, after all the discussion together, we can come out with a conclusion to stop this practice? Like example, in my country, Seychelles, because we have strong modern law here to protect the children, and we have a huge prison sentence as well. So as a new parliament, and I just want to know what is the, thank you.
Thank you so much, Seychelles, for your intervention. Now I give you the floor to the presenters to respond to those three. Then I'll pick another set of three. Thank you. Our presenters.
Thank you very much, Honorable, and thank you very much for those questions. I want to ask my colleague Mona, would you like me to start, or would you like to start?
Yeah, please go ahead, Anandita.
All right.
I'll compliment.
Perfect, thank you. So thank you very much to all the honorable members for your engagement and your interest, your questions, very interesting questions for us also to reflect on and share back. So let me start with the first question from the South Africa honorable members. So this is a very critical point that you've raised. What I want to say is, to start with, this is meant to be a regional video. So one of the discussions we had was a series of discussions to say, how do we pick the characters that best represent the diversity that we see across the region? And as you can imagine, that was not an easy ask. So the characters you've seen emerge from what we saw as depictions of young girls in our region. In fact, the names as well of the characters are reflective of names within countries in our region. So to ground it as much as possible within the regional context without sort of showing light on any one particular group and making it a generalized group. Having said that, I do think that if countries are interested in doing national animations like this, there needs to be far more nuance, because you can afford to make sure that within your countries, it clearly reflects a range of different inclusion and diversity. The reason why we have this particular one is because it's regional. So the characters, of course, can't represent every single person across all the regions, but it comes as close as we could come to in terms of the research that we had done to show the sort of composite young people, composite characters that we work with and that we interact with, so that people who look at it can also recognize themselves in the legal advocates, in the young person, in the community leaders. And so we want to show that diversity as well within the videos. And so that's the response to the first question. And having said that, I think national videos have a lot more space to be even more nuanced than we were. The second question around how far have we actually disseminated the model law, and also the really critical component around comprehensive sexuality education, which I know in Zambia has been a cause of quite a lot of debate. I actually think this is a question also for the other honorable members on the call to share with us your experiences from within your countries about how far you think the dissemination has gone and how much more you think it needs to go. Because as the Zambia honorable member rightly said, some people may not realize that comprehensive sexuality education, sexual and reproductive health services are key components of the SADC model law as well, and needs to be looked at holistically within the package of services that are required in order to really protect young girls and ensure that they are can protect it both from child marriages as well as unwanted teenage pregnancies. And this is a critical piece that I think is important to also look at, to say, okay, how far do people know about the SADC model law generally? And then how far do people know about the components that go into the SADC model law? Where are the gaps and how can we do better? So this is I think a conversation also for colleagues sitting on the call to sort of reflect on and share with us, because I would find that a very useful input. The last question from Seychelles, I believe, I couldn't hear you very well. I think the connection dropped a little bit, but I think the general question was that there is a strong law in Seychelles, and you can see that actually reflected in the Seychelles data around child marriage. It's much lower than many of the other countries on the call. And so that's something that is, it's something to really recognize the work that, that you have done within the country around legislation and policies. Having said that, Seychelles does have a very high level of teenage pregnancies. And so there is a question overall about what more can be done to really protect our vulnerable girls against both child marriage and teenage pregnancies in the context of Seychelles as well. So again, I would look at the SADC model law. There are components specifically looking at teenage pregnancies as well, and also talking about how could we ensure that young girls get the information, the services, and the support they need to really protect their sexual and reproductive health and rights, and be protected both from child marriages as well as unintended teenage pregnancies. I'll stop there and hand over to my colleague Mona for her to complement.
Thank you very much, Anandita, and I think you have comprehensively answered the question. The question from the honorable member from South Africa, I think, is well responded, and I'll not add anything to that. I'll move on to a question from the honorable member from Zambia with regards to comprehensive sexual reproductive health rights. Overall, when we look at the the global program on ending child marriage, and more specifically at the SADC model law, is really promoting the need to have legislation at country level that support interventions and efforts to end child marriage. We understand that in any given country, there are various social norms, beliefs, cultural norms, and so forth. And we have to ensure that when we look at the girl child at a holistic angle, they need to be aware of the services that are there. Let me give an example. For example, for the Christian denomination, which really promotes abstinence and other religious affiliations, they may promote more abstinence. But then again, those who follow that denomination will follow that. We hope at least that's the case. But in a case that they are not belonging to any religious affiliation, they need to have services for them. They need to have access to the sexual reproductive health rights. They need to be able to access these services. It's an ongoing debate when we look at, for example, the age of consent to sex. You know, each country will put different measures in place. But overall, looking at the human rights, the child rights perspective, what is of the best interest of a child, whether it's an adolescent child or a grown woman, what are the best interests? And what we're trying to promote is to ensure that services are available. The population knows where to go to seek for the services. We're also addressing social norms, because we also know some of the workers working in these service stations may have their own biases and beliefs, and may not, when a child goes there to ask, for example, for contraceptions, they may be denied and told that you will not get this because you're underage, or you're my friend's daughter, I will not accept that. So we're also trying to tackle all these norms and issues that are facing even the frontline workers, to be neutral and make the services available. With regards to the question from the honorable member from Seychelles, yes, follow-up is extremely important. And that's why when we have moments like celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the global program on ending child marriage, we highlight the progress made within the region. We highlight the progress made within the legislation and so forth. Even in the presentation that Anandita presented, she was also able to highlight which countries have actually put in place legislations and policy to address child marriage. So follow-up is extremely important, and the fight continues, because we still have, even though it's only 9 years left till the 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, but we still need to accelerate our efforts to end child marriage. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, our presenters, for those responses. And I'm sure the main reason of this meeting is for us to discuss and map a way forward, and as we continue to engage with each other. I would like to pick another set of 3 questions. I've seen Honorable Regina. I've seen Honorable Annie from DRC. And then I have also seen a hand from our own SG. In that order, please, Honorable Regina, you may take the floor.
Thank you, Madam. Good morning, SG. Greetings from paradise to all of you. Okay. While I was listening to the representative from UNFPA talking about the Seychelles, the high level of teenage pregnancy, this is why last week in the meeting that we had, I said that we have to revise our policy, the policy of access to contraceptive. We have to do this. Maybe this is a weakness on our part. Whereas the concern for the model law, it would be good to know how many countries have domesticated the child eradication of child marriage model law, and what are the barriers that they are facing in implementing it. Maybe this would be good for us to have, so that we could find a way forward. As for Seychelles, we used to have the law. It was an ancient law that permitted the parent to give consent for child marriage. But since we have revised our civil code last year, it has helped us to tighten all the loopholes. So the issue of child marriage is no more, because you have to be 18 to be married. And what I feel, by saying this, I have a fear. A fear that, you know, there are barriers like religious, cultural barriers, because now in Seychelles we have a lot of people from the Muslim religion, and we know with the Muslims, I don't want to offend anybody from the Muslim religion, but what we have, they have their own laws that permits them to get married. It's not registered in the national register, but in they're registered. They can change their name, they can get married, you see? And this is, I have a fee for this, because this is a loophole that maybe some teenage girls could have get married in the Muslim religion, and they are not registered on the national register. Maybe this is a food for thought. So we should look also into all the barriers, be it cultural, religious, so that for us to be on the same wavelength. Okay, I thank you.
Thank you so much for that intervention, Honorable Regina. It's really true that in our efforts to end or eradicate marriage, child marriage, we have some challenges that we face, and that one of them is the cultural and religion barriers that we need to have ways on how we can deal with them and then overcome. I agree with you. We now go to Honorable Anne from TRC. Then we'll go to our own SG. Honorable Anne, are you there?
Oui, je suis là. Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Je voudrais saluer d'abord le secrétaire général et tous les membres qui sont présents à ce forum. Je voudrais saisir cette opportunité d'abord pour remercier le FINUAP et l'UNICEF qui ne cessent de ménager aucun effort pour que leurs activités soient imposées dans nos sociétés. Ceci dit, je voudrais emboîter les pas à ma collègue qui vient de parler, que cette loi, en fait, ça requiert qu'elle soit imposée dans tous les pays de la SADC. Si cette loi est disponibilisée dans tous les pays de la SADC, elle devra peut-être être un peu modifiée pour l'adapter aux réalités de chaque pays. Je prends l'exemple du Congo.
Sorry, ma'am, is there translation to English? We can't hear.
Honorable members, if you go to the interpretation icon, you will find options, English, French, and Portuguese. Kindly tick the language of your choice and mute original audio. That would allow you to maintain the language of your choice. Thank you.
Ok, merci. Merci pour la parole. Je disais dans un premier temps, je salue la présence du secrétaire général et la présence des autres collègues qui sont présents à ces forums. Je disais que je voudrais emboîter les pas à mon collègue, à mon prédécesseur qui vient de prendre la parole, pour insister sur le fait que cette loi doit être disponibilisée dans tous les pays membres de la SADC. Ceci va permettre à chaque pays de pouvoir l'adapter à certaines réalités qui reviennent pratiquement à ces pays-là. Je disais, je prends l'exemple de la RDC, où il y a toujours des guerres récurrentes. C'est ce qui fait que les jeunes filles, en fuyant, ils n'ont pas la possibilité de se protéger et la plupart sont souvent violées. C'est ce qui fait qu'elles arrivent à avoir des grossesses indésirables, des grossesses précoces, ce qui n'arrive pas à leur permettre de pouvoir avancer avec les études et du coup, ils perdent les repères de leur avenir. Alors, par rapport à ça, nous voudrons saluer les efforts de l'UNICEF et de FINUAP qui ne ménagent aucun effort pour que la sensibilisation soit vraiment intense dans les parties qui sont victimes des guerres et dans les parties où il y a des mines. Parce qu'en fait, c'est cette activité-là à laquelle les enfants ont toujours tendance à s'adonner. Et quand ils vont dans les mines comme ça, ils perdent le contrôle et se font marier à un âge vraiment très réduit. Alors, ce que nous voulons demander, compte tenu de toutes ces réalités que nous avons dans nos pays, est-ce que ne serait-il pas possible que l'UNICEF et le FINUAP puissent proposer un programme qui puisse prendre en charge toutes ces jeunes filles qui ont des grossesses précoces, de manière à ce qu'elles ne puissent pas se perdre dans l'avenir, qu'elles soient récupérées par la formation, qu'elles soient récupérées par rapport à leur formation intellectuelle. Donc, c'est ce que nous voulons demander, qu'un programme soit mis en place pour prendre en charge toutes ces jeunes filles-là qui ont eu des grossesses précoces, ces jeunes filles qui se sont mariées de manière précoce, si elles peuvent être admises dans un centre de formation ou dans une école, je pense que ça peut leur permettre de pouvoir récupérer leur vie. Évidemment, avec la collaboration de gouvernements en place. Voilà un peu ma petite intervention. Merci.
Thank you so much, Honorable Annie from DRC for your intervention and also sharing experience with us on what happens to the young ladies in those areas where there are wars. And I believe as an institution, we are here to help each other. And I believe after this discussion, we'll have ways and our partners who assist in the recommendations that you have just put forward. May I now have Madam SG?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me just start. I needed to just say a little bit about what have we done since the development of the model law. And allow me to recall, Honorable Chair, that the honorable members at one of the plenaries, I can't recall which year, it was in Eswatini that year, agreed to have post-adoption strategies for the implementation rolling out of the model law. And this was found to be meaningful and quite progressive in the sense that we're looking at, after this development and adoption of the model law, what would be the biggest hurdles? Language, what would be the biggest hurdles? Certain customs and cultures, what would be the biggest hurdle? Acceptance of the model law as a gold standard because of the issues that we have been deliberating on. And what has happened since is what Anandita and her colleague actually outlined, and some of the issues we could not, discuss in one sitting. But there was a deliberate effort to develop guidelines, deliberate effort to develop briefs, deliberate efforts to have moot discussions on the model law through various platforms. There's been deliberate efforts to have capacity development programs at national level. And at the end of the day, I'm saying this because I would like to bring home the issue that we always speak of, to say the model law and any model law that has been developed by the SADC Parliamentary Forum has huge value. It must be seen as a standard setting tool, and it must be domesticated or seen at national level as a reference document that would assist us as we look at national laws that are governing marriage, that are looking at issues of children, age in getting into marriage. And sometimes we must also look at the fact that at the time when the model law was developed, the model law was already amplifying international law, such as the Covenant on the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and many other religious laws, such as the African Charter on the Rights of the Welfare of the Children. So this was not coming from without. It was an amplification of what our countries had already acceded to. So the issue of whether this is sufficiently popularized, I wanted to tie it to the fact that this has been addressed also in other regional and other international legal documents that our SADC countries have already acceded to. And therefore, we must take it in that spirit and begin to amplify this as a reference document to protect children, to ensure there are safeguards regarding the security, the property, and education of these children, and that each country, where possible, provides innovative measures of how they're going to protect children in this context. I must also indicate that members have spoken about the weaknesses or the gaps that have been there regarding the domestication or the manner in which this model law seems to be taken on board slowly, or where we sometimes move 2 steps forward and then we move a few steps back. And this has to do basically with prevention of discrimination. It has to do with family protection. It has to do with the best interest of the child and many others. And these are principles that are there in our various acts. These are issues that we fight with on a daily basis. And they were only taken on board in the model law to ensure that it is inclusive, that members of parliament and member states relate to these weaknesses and pitfalls in the model law, and they can come up with ways of how they can mitigate these. And therefore, this is the essence. It has been distributed across the region. The African Union has taken this on board. There's actually also a general comment on the same. The G7 countries have resolved on the model law and taken it on board. It has also been taken all over the world to ensure that we don't entertain cases relating to child marriage, that we have simplified procedures in appreciating what the model law is about. That is why we have these guidelines. That is why we have these comical animations. And we hope that it will reduce the administrative delays in ensuring that parliaments can be able to quickly say, let us have this provision, which is already in the model law. There is an issue about the fund, which is also very important. And I'm sorry I'm taking long. I need to refer to this, as the Honorable Chair indicated. I hear our members asking partners to assist. We also need to reflect on the issue of how our own countries can be self-sufficient. In the model law, we're provided for an anti-child marriage fund. and we have given what the operation should be. And I believe, honorable members, this is an important aspect of the model law, because it is only through this adequate funding that the initiatives relating to the elimination of child marriages can be carried out by our governments and the public departments. We can look elsewhere to augment, but as part of your mandate in passing the budget, in mobilizing resources for governments, I think we need to start with ourselves and say, how much resources are we allocating to this anti-child marriage fund? And in that case, we will be able to lower a percentage of the GDP or total government revenue in order to address this issue. I thank you, Chair, and I apologize for taking long. I felt I must be able to recall the resolutions that the members have taken and give guidance in terms of how this tool ought to be logically and with intent taken on board by members of Parliament. I thank you, Honorable Chair, and I apologize for being detailed.
No, it's okay, Thank you so much for the overview that you have just given us. You have enlightened us, and we hope as honorable members, as we are going through our budget sessions, we are going to be able to lobby funds for this cause as our partners also come in to assist us. They say charity begins at home. So when they say God helps those who help themselves. So if we start as members of parliament or as parliaments allocating enough funds for the purpose of ending child marriages, our partners will also come in with large amounts. I believe so. I was saying Madam SG was going to be the last, but I've seen our own senior member, Honorable Magagura from the Kingdom of Eswatini. You may take the floor. Unmute yourself, Honorable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. And may I thank very much the presenters, and in particular, the presentation or clarification given by our SG. It's much appreciated, Madam Chair or Madam Moderator. May I, from the onset, give a perspective of the theme back home. I must say, Eswatini has fully embraced the model law on child marriages via two parliamentary enactments, namely the 2012 Welfare and Children's Protection Act, and another very strong and effective law that was enacted in 2018 on sexual and women abuse law. These two pieces of legislation have strong and very deterrent sentences in line and within the spirit of the modern law. But what I may wish to maybe get clarification, I wouldn't say from the SG, maybe from the SG, is the method of ratifying the modern law. Like I'm saying, it's fully embraced, but I'm not aware at home of how it was or how it will be ratified formally. It's a good law. It has to be popularized on a region and worldwide basis. Having said that, moderator, I make reference to the previous presenters where COVID-19 was cited as having exacerbated or escalated child marriage cases. It's just a clarification because you might think you know, yet experiences elsewhere might mean something else. What that refers to in terms of escalating child marriages, that is COVID-19, because I was thinking sexual abuse and teenage cases were direct coming from COVID-19. Can someone explain on the basis of child marriages? Lastly, I may highlight, Madam Moderator, that the two pieces of legislation I've just quoted have a strong policing framework that is supported by the traditional policing framework. You know, if, for instance, in a particular traditional setting, there was a marriage of a child means under 18, the community members there would stand up and abhor, denounce that action of that individual. So that's how it is embraced even at rural settings. And they would, to the law enforcement frameworks, be flag raisers, or shall I say, report this matter as it is affecting the rights of the young child. And I may also thank UNICEF and UNIPA agencies locally in Swaziland, Eswatini. They are very helpful in popularizing, conducting workshops, etc., etc. That's why we are seen as recording the least, or shall I say, the low rate in terms of cases. I thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you.
Is the chair still on?
Yes, my network was acting up. So I have missed part of Honorable Magagrassi intervention, but what I got was he was sharing with us what Eswatini has done to eradicate the child marriages, and also he had he's seeking clarifications from the presenters on or from Madam SG, I don't know, whoever is going to respond on the methods of ratifying the model law into our member states countries. So the other part, I missed it, but I hope the presenters and Madam SG got that other part. So our presenters, you may take the floor to respond to the interventions and questions that the honorable members have put forward. Thank you.
Chair,
Thank
you
you.
also have a hand from Angola after that and from the DRC. Thank you.
Yes, I have seen them. And Eswatini, okay, all right, it's Angolan. So I wanted the presenters to take the 4 questions first, and then we pick the last 2, and then we move on.
Thank you very much to the honorable ministers, the honorable MPs for the further questions and engagement. Very interesting. I would invite my colleague Mona to start, and then I'll complement as I started last time. But before I do that, I just want to say a huge thank you to Madam Secretary General for her intervention. As you know, the program was supposed to start with the legal drafter of the SADC model law, speaking about the history of the development and domestication of the SADC model law. And unfortunately, she was not available to join us today. And that's partly the reason why some of the questions that came up were not addressed in that initial presentation, because she was not available. So Madam Secretary General actually provided a very comprehensive sort of overview of the history so far and where we can go from here, but also the real key actions taken by the Parliamentary Forum to really make sure that the model law was well known, well disseminated, and support was given for its domestication. As well as, I just want to emphasize the fact that this region was the first region in the world to have a model law on child marriage. So it's something to be really proud of. And as Madam Secretary General shared, it's been now taken up at continental and international levels as well, given how comprehensive and useful this document is. I'll stop there and hand over to Mona, and then I'll complement her responses. Over to you, Mona.
Sure. Thank you very much, Anandita, for that overview. And thank you, honorable members, for very good questions and comments that you have shared with us today. Let me start off by, and special thanks to the Madam Secretary General for giving a very clear and sharp response of what the model law is all about. It has somehow made our work much easier in explaining or providing an explanation for the questions asked. Let me start off by the question raised by Honorable Regina. How many countries have implemented the model law? As the Honorable SG mentioned in her remarks, the model law is there to provide a guidance to the parliamentarians, to the Ministry of Justice, policymakers, and other stakeholders in the SADC member states. And the purpose of this model law is for you to either enact a law that promotes the rights of the children in a holistic manner, prohibits child marriage, and encourages children to enjoy their rights. And for the member states that already have legislation in place, the model law enables you to review your legislation and see, is it efficient? Is it holistically addressing the needs of children? And we have seen, for instance, you asked about challenges. There are challenges. We've seen countries where they have a legislation in place, but also they have customary laws, which the legislation may prohibit, or, child marriage, some even criminalizes that, but the customary law enables the population to still marry their children at the young age, from the age of 16, some as young as 15 and 14. So the model law is really helping us, is there to help us all to improve this legislation and kind of link or unify these laws and have one legislation that really addresses the rights of the children. The example was given of Mozambique, where they used the SADC model law to improve the legislation and have the minimum age of marriage at 18. Before it was, I think, 16. So similar issues are happening across many different countries, even countries such as Tanzania, which actually had, and Tanzania is a member of the SADC, so they had their legislation to also allow children, both boys and girls, to marry below 18. And then only recently, about 2 years ago, when they rectified that and put the minimum age at 18. So again, this is an issue that needs for all of us to continue to advocate for and to improve the legislation in place. As Madam SG also mentioned, many countries in this region have ratified the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter and the Welfare of Children. So all of that really mandates all of us to have legislation, to domesticate that, to have legislation at country level that support the well-being of children. If I move to the question from Honorable Member from DRC, again, I'll just straight address the issue of children who are in humanitarian settings. One of the mechanisms or strategies that is being used under the global program is enhancing systems and services that respond to the needs of adolescents at risk of or affected by child marriage in all settings, in development settings where systems and legislations are in place, but also in humanitarian settings. And we're trying as much as possible to bridge this humanitarian development divide to ensure that whatever is happening at the development context also supports and is available for children or people in humanitarian setting. And COVID-19, this pandemic has really made the whole world be in a situation of an emergency, and still ensuring that services are available during that time. And we very much encourage the school re-enrollment of children. We know that children who are faced with teen pregnancies, who get married and other abuses happening to them, they may not be able to go back to school. So looking again at the policies and legislation within your countries, do you have policies that allow children to re-enroll back to school in a case where they get pregnant? So that, and this is something that both UNFPA and UNICEF are encouraging and advocating for the re-enrollment of children who may have already become pregnant. I'm not going to summarize what the SG already said, because that was more a point of clarification to everybody and really appreciated. Let me now move to the question from Eswatini, from the Honorable Member of Eswatini, asking about COVID-19 and how has that exacerbated the rates of child marriage. Well, and again, I'm making reference back to what was presented earlier. And I think it was the slide that Ananita presented. We look at COVID-19 pandemic and see that the various containment measures that various states around the world took, whether it was school closure, stay at home, restriction of mobility, curfews in some countries like Kenya, which were enforced. All of this really impacted on the family, not just the children, but also the family. And the risk of child marriage really has increased through these various pathways, because we've seen that parents or adults that once upon a time were able to go to work and get some funds to be able to support their family, were not able to do so anymore, especially those in vulnerable economic situations. The lockdowns really meant families were really stuck at home with their children and not know what to do about it. So child marriage was used as a means to relieve or to get a relief of the economic pressures within the family. We know sometimes, certain cultures have bridal prices or dowries that are paid. All of this was seen as a way to improve the well-being of the family. And what I appreciate about what UNICEF does and also UNFPA, we're not condemning these families that are doing so. These are coping mechanisms because of the financial situation. But what we're trying to do is to ensure to the development of the family to be able to support their children. And we did a study, UNICEF has done a study on the situation of COVID-19 pandemic and the impact on child marriage. And we've seen that the changes due to the restrictions and the containment measure of COVID-19 are likely to increase child marriage over the next decade, up to 10 million girls who will be at risk of becoming child brides as a result of the pandemic. So again, looking at the impact of the economic impact, the shocks that families have faced, very much are likely to increase violence. We've all seen GBV, gender-based violence within households, violence against children, and then child marriage, and also in the countries that practice harmful practices such as female genital mutilation, also that increase because it's in some communities that is a precursor to child marriage. So that is what I would like to explain to you, Honorable Member from Eswatini, on how the COVID-19 has impacted the girl child and child marriage in particular. So let me stop there and pass over to Anandita to complement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona. I think that was a very comprehensive response. Just a few additions to what Mona said. To the Honorable Member from Seychelles, I think your point about the access to contraception is key, especially when you're talking about teenage pregnancies in your country. So I really appreciate you raising that issue as well, because I think it is an important one that we often don't speak about and we should be having more conversations about. You did also mention that revisions were made to the Civil Code last year that closed some of the loopholes, and I just wanted to say congratulations for that. Of course, now we've seen very strong legislation in several countries. The next step, of course, is to implement and to ensure that how do we, as Madam Secretary General said, how do we ensure there's budgets to make that sustainable? How do we sort of advocate with our partners? And how do we make sure that the work that is in the legislation actually makes a change in the lives of young girls on the ground? To the Honorable Member from the DRC, Mona gave a very comprehensive overview about how, for us who work on the global program to end child marriage in humanitarian context is a huge area of work and a growing one, given the sort of cyclical conflicts we're seeing in many countries across the world. And the DRC is definitely very hard impacted in many ways by this kind of conflict. So what you have raised about the war and sexual violence and unintended pregnancies is a reality that we all know. It's a harsh reality that young girls in DRC and elsewhere face. And it's very, very important that we look at it also within the context of our child marriage programming. Having said that, in addition to, I think, national initiatives in DRC to address sexual violence, address teenage pregnancies and child marriage, both UNFP and UNICEF have several programs that target young girls specifically, that provide them with protection, with health services, with social services, and all the other kind of protection mechanisms to really try and ensure that they are protected against sexual exploitation, they're protected against sexual violence, and against child marriages. This requires a concerted effort together with government partners, with honorable members such as yourselves, with young people and CSOs. The work is not by one stakeholder, with several stakeholders, with the government in the driving seat. And just to say that programs do exist, and it's really a matter of making sure that we accelerate that work and our partnerships around it. To the Honorable Member from Eswatini, again, a huge congratulations about the work that has been done in terms of your parliamentary enactments to protect young girls from child marriage. You mentioned the Child Welfare Act as well as the 2018 Sexual Offences Act, both of which we have followed with close attention, and we are very glad to see that sort of progress in Eswatini, and congratulations to yourself and other MPs who have taken action to really make that happen. I just wanted to say that, and also thank you very much for the acknowledgement of the support from UNFP and UNICEF. We are here to support government partners as yourself, so we're very excited to see that work move ahead. Mona sort of explained the stress factors that lead to an increase in child marriage in COVID-19. But just to respond to you a little bit more in depth as well, we're hearing anecdotally from several countries that child marriages are growing up because of the pressures, financial and otherwise, that are exacerbated in the COVID-19 pandemic. But also Malawi recently did a study in which they showed clearly an increase in child marriage in a specific period within the pandemic compared to the same period in the previous year. And so there are emerging studies that are showing us clearly how the COVID-19 pandemic has actually driven that increase in child marriages that may not be as direct as the increase that we're seeing in gender-based violence, but it's definitely there and a huge concern. I'll stop there and hand back to the moderator. Thank you, or to the secretary.
Apologies, Chair. If I could just add to the issue that was raised by Eswatini. How is it that this model law could be domesticated? Maybe just for recall to indicate that when the model law was developed, it was not supposed to be taken hook, line, and sinker by countries. It was agreed that countries have an even provisions, have different practices and have experiences that are different related to this model law. So what was agreed there is that where relevant, a country will look at where it has weaknesses. And having done the snapshot survey, we realized that it's different for every country. Some countries are focusing on child protection, and they have laws that govern this particular single law, and they borrow from the model law to improve on that. Other countries are looking at civil marriages within a given legal or administrative framework, and they look at whether they should remove the authorization of parent or to marry a child. Available for customary and traditional marriages. And some countries are looking at that to improve their registers where possible. So we will find that where there was no centralized register now, a country is looking at how can they get this reliable data and how can it be retrieved. And some countries are also looking at other offenses provided to ensure that there's enforcement or there's compliance within this child marriage realm. So we never anticipated that the model law will appear as a law in one country. That was not the understanding. However, it requires involvement of the numerous stakeholders. The ministries which should be involved will be the ministries of child protection, family welfare, health, finance, and economic development, and departments such as the civil status division. You as members of parliament should work very closely with ministers and with the relevant portfolio committees which are engaged in this issue. Our technocrats under these ministries also offer valuable support, and they can assist with dealing with certain offenses or certain officers in charge or permanent secretaries who are involved in the issue of child marriage. So let us look at it as a holistic issue. You may unblock a particular issue as an entry point. You may begin to disseminate information regarding why this is not happening. And that was the spirit and essence of the model law. I hope that is clear. What the forum is looking at now, we are moving, we've developed, we have guidelines. We're looking at the issue of comparative law now to look at whether we can compare the laws of one country over the other and see what progress has been made, because we will not find domestication wholesale in any one given country. I hope this clarifies the usage and how best this model law ought to be adopted by countries. I thank you, Honorable Chair. There is progress in other countries. We have documented some of them, but we know that there's more that can be done. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam SG, and our presenters, our two beautiful girls who have been very wonderful on their responses. You really have done your research. And thank you so much, Madam SG, for clarifying on how the model law is working and how we keep on trying to make sure that it works for each and every country. Looking at that, each and every country has different laws, different culture, different religion. So we really need to have a unifying factor so that we can have a law that each country can use within the region as SADC member states. I now have a last set, which is we are going to recognize Angola, Honorable Anne, and then we are going to recognize Honorable Lucia Damiao, and then Honorable Lone Chijere Piri from Malawi. And then from there, after the responses, with your indulgence, Madam SG would like to propose that we go for a break. Thank you. Honorable Anne, are you ready?
Muito obrigada, senhora Presidente da sessão. Eu começaria por cumprimentar a todos e dizer que a Constituição de Angola de 2010 reconhece os direitos da criança e coloca a criança como absoluta prioridade. Foi aprovada a Lei 2512, em 2012, sobre o desenvolvimento integral da criança. Portanto, em Angola existe um quadro legal e político, havendo, no entanto, a necessidade de traduzir de maneira efetiva as prioridades e políticas-chave definidas pelo governo. Com a crise econômica instalada em 2014 e agora com a pandemia da Covid-19, evidentemente que aumenta a vulnerabilidade das populações mais pobres e provoca atrasos nos programas. Ainda em relação à criança, a Unicef tem trabalhado em parceria com o governo de Angola para assegurar os compromissos relacionados com a infância. No entanto, o regime jurídico angolano tem abordado com satisfação. Estão-me a ouvir? Desculpe, estão-me a ouvir? Pois. O regime jurídico angolano tem abordado de forma satisfatória a situação dos casamentos precoces. Em Angola, os casamentos são autorizados pelos pais aos 16 anos e os casamentos normais são a partir dos 18 anos. Penso que as leis modelo vêm dar um grande contributo no sentido de poderem uniformizar os regimes jurídicos dos países membros da SADC em relação aos casamentos precoces. Neste momento, a lei modelo aqui em Angola está no Ministério da Ação Social, Família e Promoção da Mulher. Estão no Ministério da Ação Social, Família e Promoção da Mulher para o devido tratamento. Penso, no entanto, que deve haver, a nível de todos os países, uma maior divulgação a todos os níveis, nos parlamentos, nos governos e na sociedade civil, explicando bem o que é a lei modelo sobre os casamentos precoces, para que, de facto, as pessoas entendam. Eu creio que, às vezes, é uma questão de entendimento. Também penso que se pode melhorar os sistemas de educação nas escolas, incluindo a educação sexual, para que as garotas, as jovens, façam essa abordagem e, portanto, possam estar mais preparadas para enfrentar estas situações. Porque o casamento precoce, até certo ponto, tem a ver com questões culturais, questões religiosas, que variam nos nossos países aqui da SADC, variam de país para país. E, portanto, às vezes é um bocado difícil combater isso, mas se houver divulgação e comunicação, há questões que podem ser ultrapassadas. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Honorable Anne. Can we now, Honorable Louisa, you may take the floor.
Muito obrigada, bom dia a todos. Eu gostaria, em primeiro lugar, de cumprimentar os honoráveis deputados, a presidente da nossa sessão, também a nossa secretária-geral e todo o protocolo observado. Gostaria, antes de mais, de saudar também os nossos preletores, que nos apresentaram dados muito concretos que nos devem levar a refletir profundamente sobre esta temática. Eu gostaria de dizer, em primeiro lugar, que erradicar o casamento infantil é uma das metas dos Objetivos do Desenvolvimento Sustentável. Daí que gostaria de saudar o Fórum Parlamentar da SADC, de trazer à nossa reflexão esta temática e vermos até que ponto a lei modelo está a ser aplicada nos nossos países. Mas nós devemos dizer, em primeiro lugar, que para a aplicação dessa lei, os países têm que olhar que leis têm para a proteção dos direitos das crianças. Porque as Nações Unidas estabelecem que nós devemos preservar os direitos das crianças. Por isso, dizemos várias vezes que dar à criança tudo o que ela merece. E o que é que a criança merece? Educação, amor, saúde, alimentação. Portanto, é responsabilidade também, não só dos governos, mas também das famílias, de primarem para que estes direitos sejam observados. Porque, como disse muito bem a minha colega, o casamento precoce às vezes tem como base questões políticas, económicas, sociais, religiosas e mesmo também questões culturais. Então nós devemos fazer uma análise nesse sentido e chegamos à conclusão que o casamento precoce praticamente viola os direitos das crianças e praticamente nós podemos dizer que é uma forma de roubar a vida à própria criança, pois impõe às crianças responsabilidades que são dos adultos, porque o casamento precoce depois advém também uma gravidez precoce, a criança não está preparada para dar a educação ao próprio filho que vai ter, porque ela própria necessita desta educação. Foi interrompido praticamente um ciclo na sua infância. Portanto, nós devemos refletir sobre isso, porque o casamento precoce priva as raparigas da vivência da sua infância, perturba o seu processo educativo, aumenta o risco de sofrer violência e abuso e coloca em risco a sua própria saúde física e mental. Portanto, é importante que nós, como parlamentares, como representantes do povo, devemos fazer a advocacia para o rigoroso cumprimento sobre a lei de proteção à criança. Porque nós sabemos que as crianças são o futuro e o futuro delas deve começar a ser preparado no presente. Se nós, de facto, queremos ter países em franco progresso e em franco desenvolvimento, devemos cuidar da infância das nossas crianças, devemos cuidar para que os seus direitos sejam, de facto, respeitados. Daí que eu gostaria de chamar a atenção a todos os parlamentares no sentido de nós fazermos essa advocacia do cumprimento da lei modelo, também fazermos advocacia no sentido de aumentarmos o orçamento no sentido da educação das famílias para que respeitem de facto os direitos das nossas crianças, porque de facto, se nós não prestarmos atenção a esta questão, outros problemas poderão surgir. Deste modo, eu gostaria mais uma vez felicitar o Fórum Parlamentar da SADC por trazer à reflexão esta temática tão importante que passa pela educação da nossa sociedade. Precisamos de fazer campanhas nas comunidades para educar, de facto, as populações de que nós devemos respeitar os direitos das crianças e devemos ser os primeiros a impedir que isso aconteça. Infelizmente, nas famílias mais pobres, às vezes são os próprios pais que forçam esse casamento precoce relativamente às crianças para resolverem questões que advêm da pobreza. Então é preciso que nós implementemos também os programas de combate à fome e à pobreza nos nossos países. Muito obrigado pela vossa atenção.
Thank you so much, Honorable Louisa for that intervention. From the interventions, recommendations, the clarifications that we are seeking, we can only realize that we all agree that we have a challenge in all our countries, and we are all very passionate to make sure that this child marriage should come to an end. And as members of parliament, I'm sure that we are going to work hand in hand with our responsible ministers that deal with children, and also looking at health as we look at SRHR. We now have our last speaker, Honorable Lone Piri from Malawi. Then we give it to our presenters to respond, then we can break. Thank you.
Thank you so much, moderator, for according Malawi to speak on the topic that we are discussing here. Moderator, firstly, let me thank the presenters who have presented the issues today on this forum. In the case of Malawi, Madam Presenter, I would like to add my voice as the rest are done. In Malawi, we have UNFPA, Oxfam, UN, UNICEF working tirelessly to see that girl child has got the opportunity of continuing with the education. And government has come with so many tools and laws that helps that a girl child should stay in school, or when she drops out, she should come back and continue with the education. And this is very good. And the most rapidly we have seen during the COVID-19 cases, we have seen so many cases of girl child dropping from school. And we know it's the duty of parents to see to it that their children are going back to school. And also as members of parliament here in Malawi, as Women Caucus, we've been engaging the parents, we've been engaging government on the same to see that this girl child has taken lead in the education. We know most of the times when we are championing about the girl child, male children also complain, saying, why are you taking like sides with girls only? Recently, we have also started in accommodating or bring boys as well. Those who just feel like I don't want to go to school. I want to go to, like in our country, most of the young boys goes to Mozambique to work in Mozambique just for a bicycle, like tenants in the farm. So we are taking them on board as well, like the girl child and the boy child, making sure that they get their education and they should abide to what government wants them to be. But one thing that I've noted, which is quite rampant, is that seeing Malawi, it's rated very poor, a poor country, and almost 80% of the population lives in the village. So because of this poverty, we are seeing that whatever, most of the programs that the government is doing, the partners like the UN, like I say, UNFPA, the Oxfam, UNICEF, the UN Women are trying to bring to the girl child. When we go mostly into the rural villages, we are hitting a hard wall. Why we are hitting that wall is because most of our parents in the village, they are not educated, and they don't find it like education being so useful. So most of the times it's the parents who actually accept that the girl child should go and get married at the tender age, or when they see that the girl child is being impregnated, they don't feel like it's something that they should have done something. So I was just thinking that maybe we have taken too much in the girl child, like helping the girls with fees, with things that help the girl in education, or for her to do better in her education, but we have left the parents. Now, as much as we try to talk to the girls, to help the girls, to tell them to go back to school, whatsoever, but when they go home and meet the parent who doesn't value the education, there we are seeing that we have a lot of problems. So I was just thinking that maybe the forum or our countries, our member countries, could start considering coming up with some programs whereby we should be engaging the parents themselves and telling them, or just enlightening them as to how good education is to themselves, parents, and even the child. Because when the child gets educated, then the parents who are poor in the village, their status now will change, will be better. And most of the time, like, when we are in a women caucus, when we are meeting, we are interacting with girls, we give them examples. Most of us who are members of parliament now, we are not like, we are coming from a very good background where our parents had everything. No, most of us, we are really coming from the same background which they are now, the rural setup. But we fought all odds, and here we are today. But this thing, most of the parents do not receive it well, because what they say, I know in those days and in these days, life is different. In those days, we are living in a life of plenty. This time around, life is hard. You need cash for your life to move. So most of them, they feel like marrying off their children, the girl child, is the better way for them to achieve what they want to do. So I was just looking at it saying, UN, UNICEF, and all the several NGOs who are in our constituencies, who are in our country, helping our girl child with bicycles, with books, whatsoever. They are doing a very good job, but we are leaving one aspect, which is the parents. I think it's time we should start now targeting the parents so that they should understand the goodness of education, mostly in the local village. With these few remarks, Madam Moderator, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Rone Piri, Women Chair for Women Caucus for Parliament of Malawi, for sharing your experience and what Women Caucus is doing to help end the child marriages and also get back the children or girl child who has fallen pregnant or has gone to a marriage to go back to school. Thank you so much for that. Our presenters, our two beautiful girls, you may now come in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that last round of comments and questions from the honorable members. Very happy to take that. I'll start and then I'll ask my colleague Mona to complement. So to start with, the honorable member from Angola, you mentioned the fact that in Angola right now, marriage below the age of 16 is allowed with parental consent. So these are the kind of loopholes that we try to close with the SADC model law. We spoke about how the SADC model law is the gold standard, and some of that includes ensuring that we don't have this kind of legal loopholes that allow marriages below the age of 16, but we actually have legislation in place that says age of consent to marriage is set at 18 with absolutely no loopholes. So that is an important sort of advocacy ask for Angola, and to use the SADC model law to try and potentially change that legislation. You also mentioned very clearly the importance of education, including comprehensive education. And this was also echoed in the honorable member from Zambia who spoke earlier in the session, who also spoke about the need of comprehensive sexuality education. And I just want to acknowledge how important that is, because what it is really is that if it's a good comprehensive sexuality education program, it transforms gender norms, including harmful gender norms that drive child marriage. It addresses gender-based violence, and it provides young people the information and the access to the knowledge on how they can protect their own health, including their sexual and reproductive health. And good comprehensive sexuality education program would also be linked with sexual and reproductive health services. And this is where I want to talk about a little bit about the East and Southern Africa commitment that several of the countries sitting in this call are part of and have signed up for. The East and Southern Africa commitment is a commitment by countries that were co-signed by the Ministries of Education and the Ministries of Health that said in order to protect our young people, in order to ensure that they can lead full healthy lives and are able to reach their full potential, they need access to CSC and they need access to services. And this is the commitment that was made by several countries in the region that I also think is an important piece for parliamentarians to take forward as part of the child marriage work as well. So I just wanted to say that's really important. The other honorable as well, who also spoke about the need to examine which laws already exist. That is a key part of the SADC model law domestication process. If you look at the guide to the SADC model law, it says very clearly that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but rather to look at what existing pieces of legislation there are, if there are gaps, and how those gaps can be filled using the SADC model law. And that is a very important piece as well. And I think you also brought up the rights of children, which is very, very important. The human rights aspect to this work is very critical and something that we must keep an eye on in the work we do, and to emphasize the human rights aspect as well when we hit cultural or religious barriers, because that is an important piece to keep in mind. And then finally, the honorable member from Malawi brought up a very, very interesting point about the sort of demographic makeup of Malawi, which is both very poor and also very rural. And how do we make the case for parents or family members to say there's a value in your girl child having an education, there's a value in your girl child delaying her marriage, you know, there's a value in a girl child being empowered to make her own decisions. And I think that is a very important area of work and intervention. UNFPA, together with several other partners and the government, works very closely with community members, which in many cases also includes parents, to say this is an argument that we need, or this is the arguments for why it's important to invest in your girl child. And these are the alternatives for her. And I think you brought up a very important point, MP, which is to see the examples in reality, to hear from people from within your community who made those different choices, and the kind of long-term positive impact they've had in their lives is very important. And so something that I just want to reinforce in what you have raised, which is very critical. You also spoke about the fact that young boys are saying, what about us? Why aren't we involved? And I think that's very important. We talk a lot about we need to engage men and boys better. We need to say you are part of the solution. You're not part of the problem. You're part of the solution. You can be allies in changing gender inequality, in making sure that girls are protected from child marriage. And part of that is making sure that we do what we call behavior setting. If you talk to a young boy who may not have had an adverse, who may not already have a certain set idea about gender or women's roles, we have the opportunity to actually influence the boys sort of thinking around gender equality and set in place positive behaviors and positive gender norms that can have long-term impact. So I think there is real value in how we engage with men and boys more proactively and more sustainably in our work around child marriage. And in fact, UNFPA and UNICEF have a lot of resources on how we can do that better and where we can go from here. I'll stop there and hand over to my colleague, Mona. Mona, just before you comment, the last thing I wanted to say in response to what was raised today by several MPs is about the sort of what are the good practices that currently exist in countries that have domesticated the SADC model law. And one of the things that we want to do as part of the 5-year anniversary of the global program to end child marriage this year is to really document those stories, the stories of actions that have led to real change on the ground, that have led to legislative change in countries where there may have been resistance, and to say these are the sort of steps that were taken in the other countries for countries who want to do the same thing and are struggling or potentially reaching barriers. And so that work will be ongoing. We'll be reaching out to MPs in the next few months to document those stories and to share those stories as part of our 5-year anniversary as well. I'll stop there and over to you, Mona.
Thank you, Anandita. I think you have responded very well to the questions asked by the honorable members. I just wanted to maybe come in and highlight a bit more about the issue of child marriage occurring with boys. I just wanted to also highlight that child marriage actually occurs amongst boys as well. We've mainly highlighted the rates of child marriage concerning girls, but I just want to highlight that in 3 countries within the Eastern and Southern Africa region, we have Madagascar, Comoros, Mozambique, and in these countries, at least 1 in 10 young men were first married in childhood. So there is still a need, even though their rate is a bit lower, we still need to put our efforts in addressing child marriage within the boy child. And I also would like to emphasize the point Anandita made, responding to the member from, honorable member from Malawi. One of the strategies that the Global Program on Ending Child Marriage uses is to promote positive social norms and gender norms. And we're looking also at gender norms change, gender equitable attitudes and behaviors among adolescents, families, and communities. And here we are emphasizing more on male engagement, changing male attitudes and beliefs on child marriage. This also is something that we're looking at how to best adapt as a primary objective in all child marriage prevention programs. Girls and boys, of course, need to be supported by families and communities who will further then invest in educating girls as they will see the benefits of alternative life opportunity for girls and boys. So the emphasis when this global program first started was mainly on the girl child because this challenge faces the girl child more compared to the boy child. I just mentioned the statistics, 1 in 10 boys are married in childhood, but more girls are married within childhood. So when the global program was evaluated, one of the recommendations for phase 2, which we're currently in, is to ensure we have more of gender transformative approaches, but also more on male engagement. So this is an area that the 4 countries I mentioned earlier, implementing the global program, looking into to see how best to also engage the family at large, the whole community that surrounds this girl child that we are trying to advocate for all her rights. So this is something very important to mention. Lastly, from me, what I'd like to put forward also as something for all of you Member of Parliament, Honorable Member of Parliament, is to see at the area, to look into the area of the investment you're making in addressing activities on ending child marriage, looking particularly at the public financing for children. I mentioned earlier in one of the resources, there is a guideline that we have developed, UNICEF has developed to support countries to develop child protection budget briefs, which will then inform you how much are you allocating, how much resources are you allocating towards interventions that end to child marriage. Because here we're talking about the importance of have legislation at country level, but how much is being budgeted for the legislations that you are enacting to ensure that there is implementation beyond the support that is made available from the development partners. The global program is looking at the target of 2030, which is 9 years more to go. But then again, how can we ensure that the activities that's required to continue are sustained to end child marriage beyond 2030? And I think this is a challenge that I'm very much encouraging all of us to look into and to see when you're planning and budgeting your plans, to ensure also, given that you have a law in place that addresses child marriage, to also allocate resources that can then be complemented by the development partners within your countries. I thank you.
Thank you so much, our presenters, for those responses. And I'm sure we can see with the time that we have taken that this issue is very important and is affecting each and every country in our region. And I'm sure as honorable members and partners, we are going to make sure we work on ending the child marriages. Honorable members and partners, I earlier indicated that after this set, we are going to go for break. By looking at time, we were supposed to be in session 2 now. So there is a suggestion, because our meeting is supposed to end at 2 p.m. There's a suggestion that we don't go for break, we go to session 2 so that we finish in time. Honorable members, are we okay with that? Madam Esti, with your indulgence.
Yes, Honorable Chair.
With your indulgence, may we just continue and finish at 2 instead of us breaking, because we are looking at time. We are supposed to finish at 2 p.m. and we still have so much to discuss.
Is the chair pleases? We may continue.
Thank you so much, Madam Esti, for that. Honourable members, we now move on to session 2. Our presenters here for session 2. Are they ready?
Yes, Honorable Chair, we're ready.
Thank you so much. You might take the floor. You introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable members, the Secretary General of the SADC PF, distinguished colleagues from UNFPA and UNICEF, members of the Secretariat. My name is Nyasha Chingore. And for this session 2 that we're going to begin now, I will be sharing the presentation with my colleague, Yunus Mohammed. I am from the AIDS and Rights Alliance for Southern Africa, ARASA, and Yunus is from the Southern Africa Program on Access to Medicines and Diagnostics, SAPAM. We are honored to once again have this opportunity to engage with you on this important issue around the impact of intellectual property and patent laws on access to essential pharmaceutical medicines and diagnostics. We began this conversation with SADC PF in 2018 through an engagement with the Standing Committee on Trade, Finance and Investments. Cognizant of time, I will not take too much time giving a background of our organizations. Suffice to say that our own engagement on the issue of access to medicines is of course grounded in the experiences around advocating for access to medicines for HIV, AIDS and TB. The lessons learned from these experiences were relevant for other diseases and are relevant for other diseases, including non-communicable diseases. And of course, our current context of COVID-19 highlights the need to increase momentum on ensuring access to medicines now more than ever, as conversations around how to ensure an equitable rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, regardless of income level of countries, increases momentum. There are different measures that can be implemented at international, regional, and national levels to improve access to COVID-19 therapeutics, and parliamentarians can play a role in ensuring these measures are implemented at national level. So what we hope to do with this presentation, as my colleague Yunus puts it up for us, what we are hoping to do with this presentation is to quickly take you honorable members through the basics of intellectual property and its impact on health. From there, we will explore the opportunities to build a pharmaceutical industry within the SADC region, and then quickly talk through the progress that has been made by some of the SADC member states in efforts to review and revise or install progressive intellectual or patent law regimes in national policies. And then finally, we will hone in on the current context and discuss options available to member states to improve access to COVID-19 therapeutics, that is diagnostics and vaccines, as well as the role that you as honorable members of parliament can play in this. Due to the time considerations and with the chair's permission, we had reached out to the secretariat. I don't know if this message had reached you. We are proposing to consolidate the two presentations as reflected in your program into one, and then have a one session of deliberations just to assist with the whole issue of catching up with time. So Honorable Chair, I can see you, if you can nod, if this is okay with you, that we consolidate into one presentation. Thank you, Honorable Chair. We will just begin the conversation quite quickly. The title really of our presentation is the nexus between access to healthcare and the Sustainable Development Goals and intellectual property. And we will be focusing on progress, as we said, within the SADC region. Eunice, next slide, please. So as I said, we'll start very quickly with just an overview of intellectual property and its impact on health. As some of us may know, the main challenge with intellectual property rights and access to medicines is the huge gap that exists between the disease burden that we have and the very slow uptake that we're having of what are called TRIPS flexibilities that are freely available to most of our countries. There are a number of reasons why we have this slow uptake of these TRIPS flexibilities. Some of these reasons are structural and others are technical. But a lot of best practice on the use of TRIPS flexibilities are available from other southern countries, including India, Thailand, Brazil, Malaysia, and African countries, including ours in the SADC region, can really take advantage of this. So generic manufacturing, for instance, can produce a local source of medicines, as well as job creation, etc. And if we explore this further, we might be able to utilize this. This is just a kind of cartoon that kind of shows this very difficult space that we have around the costs of medicines and the fact that, you know, if people are unable to afford medicines, then this puts them in a very difficult situation. So this humorous and yet not so humorous cartoon, which says that we can't afford to get sick, shows the kind of, you know, crisis that we find ourselves in. Next slide, please, Eunice. Just as I referred to earlier, an example from HIV, which shows us that before the utilization of TRIPS flexibilities, the costs of pediatric HIV medicines and how that cost economically declined because of the use of TRIPS flexibilities. Next slide, Eunice. Just wanted to hone in once again on why this is important and where really TRIPS flexibilities and access to medicines fit in to the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, which is Goal 3, around, you know, health for all, increasing health for all. So just wanted to highlight here that, you know, access to medicines will not only be secured through ensuring IP or patent law reform, neither only by laws being compliant with TRIPS flexibilities, or by just kind of importation of generics from other countries, such as mentioned, India, Brazil, etc. But we also need to address the issue of innovation at local level, or at least at regional level, and address the problem of access to medicines, which requires a more holistic and sustainable approach, which includes looking at the TRIPS flexibilities that actually look at stimulating local and regional production of pharmaceuticals. Next slide, please. So this is just going in a little bit more into Goal 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll go to the next slide. and wanted to talk a little bit about the high-level panel that was appointed by the UN Secretary General in November 2015, in line with the Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals, and some of the recommendations that were made by the Global Commission on HIV on the law as it relates to TRIPS and access to medicines. So the mandate of the high-level panel was really to review and assess the proposals and recommendations for remedying the kind of incoherence that we find between the justifiable need to protect the rights of inventors, international human rights law and trade laws, as it were. So this was the mandate of the high-level panel, and also to propose ways of incentivizing health and research and development and increasing access to medicines. They came up with a number of recommendations, which include that World Trade Organization members must actually make full use of the flexibilities, the TRIPS flexibilities, as confirmed by the Doha Declaration on TRIPS on public health, which is really a declaration that talks about the fact that whilst patent laws and intellectual property is acknowledged, there must be this balancing with public health within this context. World Trade Organization members were also recommended to make full use of the policy space available under Article 27 of the TRIPS by adopting and applying rigorous definitions of inventions and patentability. This is just to ensure that, medicines are not continuously repatented to protect the monopoly of pharmaceutical companies, etc., where this is no longer necessary. So just ensuring that this full use of this policy space is utilized. And there was also a recommendation to strengthen the capacity of patent examiners at national and at regional level. For the Africa region, this would be through the institution of ARIPO, to apply regional rigorous public health standards to intellectual property protection and particularly patent protection in our countries. There were also recommendations around the adoption and implementation of legislation that facilitates issuing of compulsory licenses for essential medicines. And there were recommendations around how to enter into protective bilateral agreements to ensure that those agreements do not actually include provisions that interfere with government's obligations to fulfill the right to health. There was also a recommendation around the need to conduct public health assessments at national level by World Trade Organization members, and also that governments should develop, test, and implement models of funding that would actually reward innovations in research and development. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn over now to my colleague, Eunice, who is going to take us through some of the opportunities to build a pharmaceutical industry in the region and some of the work that we actually have been doing with the SADC Secretariat. Over to you, Eunice.
Thank you, Nyasha. Good afternoon and compliments to the SG and honorable members and my esteemed colleagues. All protocols observed. I'm glad to be at least one male presenter in this forum today. So at least I represent my side, at least contributing to access to healthcare. So when we're looking at the pharmaceutical industry in the region, I think an important oversight is to remember that least developed countries are not obliged to implement patent laws, especially for essential items. And I'll show you the status of where we're at and the fact that it's an underutilized opportunity for us to go ahead and promote local generic manufacturing of the essential items, particularly COVID as well. And there are several options that we can look at for this. When you look at the SADC Pharmaceutical Business Plan 2015 to 2019, there are a number of strategic priority areas. Another one that's not emphasized often is the traditional medicines. And if you look at the root cause of traditional medicines, often innovative products start off from traditional medicine roots, but yet they go through the research. Yes, there are resources and expenses implemented. But once they complete the cycle of clinical trials and non-clinical trials, they come out to be a patented product, serving the same communities of the information where the traditional medicines originated. So I think another area of the SADC pharmaceutical business plan and the priority is to create an enabling environment to promote local and regional production. This would help us to import, to develop, to open doors for technology transfer and cut down the dependence on pure importation of innovative products where we can look at local producing generic medicines. And of course, facilitating trade of pharmaceuticals within SADC is another strategic priority. There are weaknesses. One of the weaknesses we look at is the human resources, the low capacity utilization. There are very few local production sites and facilities and skill sets, and that's something we need to focus and turn around into, to look at how can we develop the local skills, working in tandem with the academia, with the institutions, the research, and the government to plug in those gaps. A lack of local supply of raw materials, high operating costs. So something like the Africa Medicines Agency and then the AFC FTA. So there's this whole movement that has had a conversation for many years running now, where we are moving towards standardization and harmonization. And when we're going into that direction, that can allow us better to compete with established organizations or established pharmaceutical industry players by developing our own skill and cutting out the tariffs and trade embargoes between the different countries. And that is where the conversation of harmonization moves towards. So by allowing a product to be manufactured, for example, in Malawi, that passed the quality criteria to be exported to any SADC country, already you are facilitating trade at a low cost and you're promoting local production. So I think that in essence is where the harmonization and the standardization is coming in. Okay, I've spoken about African traditional medicines, and there is conversations involved in this, but I think there needs to establish verified quality checked data banks of traditional medicines, the indigenous knowledge and all of that, I think would go a long way towards verifying the development and the technology innovations that can come from there. Okay, I'm just going to skip this one because we spoke about pharmaceutical trade. Advocating for the development and developing legislation and policies to facilitate access. The ultimate goal is to remove barriers. One of the barriers is utilizing and applying the TRIPS flexibilities. I will explain a little bit more of what is the flexibilities and how it will play out for a least developed country and how we can benefit as a region from there. So yes, our governments have committed to the SDGs, but the role, the oversight role that leads back to the honorable parliamentarians, to ourselves, to ensure that we are monitoring and evaluating the progress, that we have national programs and policies in place, that strategies to improve access to medicines are taking place, that budget is there and does become available for it. So the SADC Industrialization Agenda 2063 focuses on exactly what I've said, bringing together, moving towards standardization and harmonization, reducing the barriers for access to medicines, and that's applicable to all the countries, with the ultimate goal of not meeting just your national, but regional and sustainable development goal as well. So in 2018, between ARASA and SAPEM, we did engage the SADC PF, and going back to previous years, when we worked with the SADC Secretariat, there's a baseline study of the region and how we are applying TRIPS flexibilities what is our status on IP legislation within our countries. And from our engagement in 2018, after the feedback we had, we introduced a tool called the snapshot report. So because this is a very technically complex subject, the suggestion and the feedback we received was that we develop a tool that will allow any person with any background to utilize to say, okay, this is what the TRIPS flexibilities, this is how it's applicable to my country, this is the current status of where we're at, and it becomes an easy to use resource that you can immediately tap into when you are advocating, when you are involved in your conversations. And that's exactly what we've done in 2018, and it was introduced and demonstrated at the SADC PF meeting. And what we've done since then is we've now updated the baseline report, and we've updated each country, so each 16 member states snapshot reports. And that's what I'm going to take you through now to show you the tool and how it can be used. So I'm just going to run through this quickly. Some of the linkages between the SADC PF and the policy, the developments, and our interventions that have happened from 2017 going forward. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So in 2017, we hosted we met with SADC PF, and we co-hosted a follow-up session with the Standing Committee on TIFI. And then we basically through that, we presented the report and the barriers, the breaking IP barriers report. And that was when we had the engagement and the feedback and identified the lack of awareness and the knowledge around TRIPS. Going forward, basically, we tied in and aligned to the SADC Pharmaceutical Business Plan, the Industrialization Week. And basically in 2018 was when we first introduced the snapshot reports. So as I mentioned previously, and I'm going to show you examples of this, the snapshot report gives you a brief intellectual property profile of each country. And all of this is available already. And the new updated versions will be available in all 3 languages and will be available for download. So you can access it and download it whenever you need to. So in addition to the brief intellectual property profile, we've got a disease profile on HIV, TB, and the non-communicable diseases, the status of your respective countries in harnessing the TRIPS flexibilities, your manufacturing capacity, your intellectual property timeline since becoming a World Trade Organization member, and the policy recommendations. So also through ARASA, what was developed is an intellectual property essential guide, and that's also been updated in 2021, and that's also a resource that will be available to everyone, from the parliamentarians to any normal citizens on the street. They're welcome to go and look at it, download it, and utilize it with the whole intent to promote advocacy. So a lot of work has been done between SADC, between the SADC PF, between ARASA, between SAPM, and numerous other stakeholders. I mean, we've been at this from 2007. Looking at the first SADC Pharmaceutical Business Plan, SAPM was involved in implementation and support on a number of projects that covered pool procurement, regulated harmonization, civil society engagement, TRIPS flexibilities, and providing technology support as well. So as I mentioned, one of the first things we did for this was to say, okay, where are we as a region and for each country, and where do we stand? So that baseline assessment was done in 2012, and it looked at each country in SADC, the IP and patent laws, and what has been done. So through the program between 2012 and 2014, we assisted seven countries to review their IP legislation. And then going ahead after that, there was also developed a database of regional experts in IP legislation. So also the intent behind there is to utilize local and regionally based experts instead of purely just relying on international experts. And then another outcome in 2014 was the SADC medicines database, and the whole intent behind that was to share information and pricing on all procurements, also indicating whether they are generic or innovative medicines. And by sharing that price, and not just pricing, but the whole picture on information for each medicine product, that will allow savings, and it indicates cost saving potential. So this has been successfully piloted at SADC level, and the conversation has moved ahead, and there is it's a whole different project, but it is progressing slowly, but it is looking positively in terms of scaling up, where particularly with COVID, the whole emphasis and stress is on people sharing information on vaccines, on which vaccine is this, what does this, and what's the price this country is paying versus this country, considering it's the same product from the same manufacturing company. So that's the intent behind the information and price sharing database. And then in 2015, the SADC pharmaceutical business plan has been updated. Of course, we are now in 2021. Bearing in mind 2020 was, I think, a bit of a span in the works for everyone. We are aware that it is being evaluated at the moment. So there is look to move towards a new pharmaceutical business plan, probably 2021 and beyond. But I think at the moment, the concentration is on evaluating what has been done, what has been achieved, and what needs to be done going ahead. So in 2018, we developed the regional report and the 16 focus country snapshots, which has been updated, and that's the one I'm going to present probably in the next slide. And then since then, between 2017 and 2019, 5 countries in SADC had draft patent IP bills. Republic of Zimbabwe and South Africa approved their national policies in 2019. And between 2020 and 2021, 4 out of the 16 SADC countries have enacted the new IP patent legislations, and 2 are pending implementation regulations, and 3 in revision state. And we've updated the reports, which I'm going to show you shortly. So I've spoken about the political will behind the flexibilities. So the SADC pharmaceutical business plan has the strategic priority in there, and it also in the industrialization, SADC industrialization strategy 2063. So there is indication that there is political will to move this ahead. There is indication now, particularly with COVID, where you've got countries lobbying the World Trade Organization for voluntary compulsory licensing for patent sharing to produce the vaccine for COVID, to produce generics for essential medicines. So I think from where we stood in 2012, the level of awareness has definitely shifted. And there is traction, and there is, I think COVID is in a positive light, brought a lot of this forward and highlighted it, but also highlights the gaps that we need to focus on. So some examples, and I've randomly selected countries just to show you the different states. Some of them are approved, some of them are in draft, some of them are in revision, just to give you an idea of what the snapshot report looks like and how easy it will be as a resource tool for you to use. So looking at Botswana, you'll see the brief top left is just a short profile on the country and the IP status. Then you've got the policy recommendations, the country indicator, the disease indicator, and then since becoming a member of the WTO, all the events that have happened. And you'll see there's a green thumb for something that has moved ahead, yes, or something that hasn't been moved ahead, it's got a yellow thumb. And then it's actually a 2-page snapshot report. So aside from this, you can see immediately where your country is at the moment, what the events have happened. And then the second page to that report is an actual timeline to show you all the events necessary to your IP legislation and policies and where you stand in. right up to date. So we've updated this up to basically to date, 2021. And we will continuously do this. And all of this is available for you as a resource tool for each member state country. So all 16 countries are in there. So then just a bit on the intellectual property environment and the cost saving mechanism, already focusing on HIV, TB, basically any of the serious disease conditions and the NCDs. And then to show you the drug cost comparison that can happen between a generic and a brand name. So this is an example of South Africa, and you'll see basically exactly the same layout for each country. Obviously, each country has different progression. And you can see there that that's the same timeline and intellectual property policy environment. There's an example of Zambia, and Mauritius is another example. So all of these reports is accessible already. We haven't yet put on the 2021 versions. So this link is where you would be able to access it at SAPM Regional Country Reports, including the regional report updates. So the new one would be 2021, and each country's report, you just have to click on it and you can download it at the site. But all this presentation and information will be shared to you. So what is, my colleague Nyasha's went over TRIPS flexibilities. I mean, with that cartoon, you could see the price of medicines is ridiculous. It's unaffordable. So the sad reality is you can't afford to get sick. And the fact that we need to promote local production and cut out the dependence on importing medicines, I think that is a given, that we've participated in the COVAX facility and those items, that I think we've taken small steps. The move towards standardization and harmonization is going to be a huge step, because it will allow any locally produced item to be exported without the trade tariffs and other taxes to any other SADC country, and that will allow it to be competitive to any imported product. Because at the moment, when you look at capacity, I mean, the capacity for Botswana versus the capacity of another country is usually different, just because of the geographic aspect. So that now when you suddenly open up, they say, okay, the volume for SADC for a COVID vaccine is so much, then it becomes in the interest of the manufacturer to say, okay, it is worth investment, it is worth it, because I am opening the markets to that volume. So I think managing the supply demand and promoting the better efficiency and capacity, that will be useful. But I've spoken about the opportunity for least developed countries in making use of the transition period of TRIPS flexibilities. And that is an underutilized aspect. So there's currently 9 LDC countries in SADC. And what it means to be utilizing a TRIPS flexibility is that you are exempt from applying patent laws for an essential item in your country. So you can go ahead and manufacture that product up to 2033. That's the flexibility that's been given. And the reality is this is not utilized, and it's not really being happening. So we have no concrete evidence that LDCs in the region are making use of these flexibilities. And contrarily, most of them are allowing their patents to be registered without proper understanding, awareness, or actual opposition. So that means we've put out patents in the region that didn't really deserve to be patented. Some LDCs have applied compulsory licenses to local manufacturers to produce medicines still on patent. So there is an example in Zimbabwe where that's been done successfully. But I think we've just scraped the tip of the iceberg, and more of this needs to be happening. We need to take advantage of this transition period. And some allow parallel importation on the grounds of interest of public health, but I think much more needs to be done on that. And the challenges we have on that is that there's a lack of understanding and appreciation of the tangible benefits. Because when you speak TRIPS flexibilities, it sounds very technical and legal, and it is a very legal dynamic field, sometimes intentionally set so. But hopefully the snapshot reports we've developed, it's a simple 2-page report that will go a long way in assisting the user to give you verifiable facts and arguments to put forward your case and advocacy. And there are conflicting interests between the industrial policy, the public health, and our internal departments. I think that a lack of clarity of roles and responsibilities often takes place where, because it's a bit of a crossover topic between health, pharmaceutical, legal, financial. I think the clarity on roles and responsibilities sometimes causes delays. National interests overriding potential benefits from regional cooperation. Yeah, I mentioned the only way we have a chance of promoting local production, of utilizing TRIPS flexibilities, is if we regionally cooperate, because then we are operating as not one member of SADC, of not one country, we are operating as a region. That gives us much more leverage, 16 countries leverage of supply and volume. And that allows you to promote your local producers, to develop your technology transfer, or to push for voluntary licensing of patented products where you can get the license and then develop it internally. So unless we operate regionally, we will always bear the struggle because of national sovereignty. Bilateral trade agreements often negates the benefits of TRIPS flexibilities. Often countries find themselves in a space of bilateral agreements with a pharmaceutical institute or manufacturer, and that overrides the regional strategy. So on one hand, we want to work regionally and we want to work together, but your bilateral agreement dictates you're committed to this agreement. So yeah, I think getting the balance right is an important understanding. And apparently there is inertia in parliamentary processes in getting to both stage. You colleagues, honorable members, are the experts in that. So that is why I think a tool like the snapshot report should make your life easier. So what can we do to move forward and address this? I think definitely to increase the understanding and appreciation of that. And that's what between SADC PF, the SADC Secretariat, between us and SAPM and other stakeholders, that's what we're trying to do, to bridge this gap of understanding and awareness by developing easy to use, factual, verified snapshot reports, and do presentations like this and have these type of discussions. We've spoken about manufacturing and teaming up with other manufacturers in other countries or other parts of the world for technology transfer. So develop internal skills. But obviously there is a quality criterion where there's no point developing if we are developing products that don't meet pre-qualification standards. Excuse me. Strengthening linkages between pool procurement cooperation, local production, regulatory harmonization. Some of these projects and strategies are already implemented and have progressed quite far and successfully within SADC. But there are linkages between this. And in my opinion, the only way local production will work is a cooperation between procurement cooperation, regulatory harmonization, and civil society engagement and TRIPS flexibilities. So bringing those 4 arms would definitely promote local production. We cannot approach this in isolation and just say, okay, let's just get our regulatory systems better and let's engage civil society. if we pull all of these four together and we do emphasize the regional strategies, we can go a long way towards local production and providing essential access to medicines. That's exactly what I just said now. The move towards local production and tapping into those four elements to improve access. So it envisions that based on the progress that has been made, we should be in an enabling position to harness the flexibilities that's afforded. And if we do this, if we follow these steps, if we utilize the tools, if we advocate, if we push for harmonization, for standardization, if we work together and firstly, I think, inform ourselves, become aware of the African Medicines Agency, the AFC, FDA, become aware of these bigger conversations and how it will contribute to the national priorities, we can be in a position to respond to our communicable and non-communicable public health concerns, whether that is COVID or TB or HIV, malaria or anything. But bringing in this harmonized effort, I think, would put us in the right direction. And that brings us on to the topic of how does all of this relate to the COVID pandemic. So they say that necessity is the mother of innovation. I think chaos tells you who your true friends are. We've seen when the vaccines are manufactured and ordered and distributed, where exactly the low and middle income countries stand. And the notion that no one is safe unless everyone is safe has been thrown out of the window. It is each country for themselves. We've seen countries hoarding vaccines. We've seen countries buying surplus of their need. And we've seen like some discretion, some discrepancies on the ordering distribution agreement processes from manufacturers into public health bodies. And this whole picture, I think, emphasizes why it is important for countries to have IP policies in place to ensure that we have access to these medicines, or we can do it for ourselves. So just some background information, and I've got, I think, two or three more slides, and then we open up for discussion. Just some background information. The Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, it's a global collaboration solution for expediting the end of the pandemic. It has got 4 pillars. One of them is COVAX, which I think some of you might be aware of. It's been basically the strong arm in vaccine distribution and supply. And the COVAX has been convened by a number of organizations, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, Gavi, WHO. And the whole intent behind this is to accelerate the development, production, and distribution of vaccines to everyone. The downside is that it has not really reached much progression yet. And most other countries, I think most countries rely on this highly subsidized mechanism because we are dependent on it, and we cannot, most of us cannot procure ourselves or produce ourselves, and that is the problem. So there has been one consignment that we know came through African Union. There is not much information available, again, which speaks to the information, price sharing, procurement sharing of information across member states, which kind of plugs in these gaps very easily. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of preparedness. I mean, the fact that we've had, SADC has done a lot of things right. We've had regulatory harmonization back in 2014. We've had procurement cooperation in 2014. TRIPS flexibilities has been a priority. So from where we were to 2020, actually a lot of work has been done. If you looked at the stats of how many countries have reviewed, enacted, drafted, and actually implemented the IP legislation, quite a bit has been done in the last 10 years. It's a pity it hasn't been done sooner, but I think we must recognize and acknowledge that a lot of work has been done. But I think COVID has also shown and demonstrated that although we've done so much, the preparedness gap is still huge, and we need to close that gap, because if today it's COVID, tomorrow it's something else, and that's a position we need to focus on. So there are different avenues. There is no silver bullet solution, and there is no one size fits all. So I think there are different avenues and options to consider. So for LDCs to utilize those flexibilities, basically you are exempted from applying the patent, and you can go ahead and utilize that and manufacture that item. There are voluntary and compulsory licenses where a company can voluntarily disclose a license and say, okay, I will work with these manufacturers in these countries, and we'll share the license and the technology to manufacture this item. Or if it's an essential item, the country is in a position to say, okay, we want a compulsory license issued to locally manufacture this. I've spoken about bilateral agreements and the challenge they have on on dividing the national priority and the regional priority. An alternate solution could be a mix of the two, and then another solution is the patent pooling, where a regional patent pool is available, and whichever country participates in that can share the technology transfer. One example of that is the medicines patent pool. Unfortunately for COVID, there isn't yet any successful patent pool that a manufacturer is throwing in the hat and say, okay, there's a patent that you can work with. So currently it is purely the big pharmaceutical guys that we know are there, and we are dependent on that. So working through a regional cooperative strategy or SADC pool procurement mechanism would be a viable solution for regional distribution. I think it's my next slide that we have. So most SADC countries already have vaccine distribution infrastructure in place, because it's been part of, I think we've been part of our national health programs for a few years, from the shots we used to get in school, from your TB, malaria programs. So that infrastructure is there compared to actually most of the developed countries. That is something we have in place that they don't. So it puts us in a good position to work quickly the minute these vaccines become available for distribution. I think that was my last slide. I'm going to thank you from myself and from my colleague Nyasha, and Madam Chair, we open back to you, open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyasha and Eunice, for the presentation on the report on status of TRIPS flexibility in the region. And I'm sure as honorable members, we are now aware of our roles in making sure that there is accessibility to medicine to everyone in our countries. Honorable members, we are running out of time. I will just take one set of questions, 3 members, if you have questions or you need clarification from the 2 presenters. Any takers? I recognize Madam SG.
Apologies, Chair. I was just appreciating the presentations. It was a clap, not a raised hand. Thank you.
All right. Any takers before we move to the next item? Paulina, is your hand up?
Yes, Madam Chair, my hand is up.
All right, I recognize you.
Thank
you. May take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to appreciate the presentation by our 2 presenters, but perhaps really to stress the need for where there is mention on the access to medication. And indeed, that is a problem that you see globally, and also SADC and Zimbabwe also included. And I hope and trust that even as we serve as members of parliament in our communities, the vulnerable groups should actually be facilitated so as to get access to treatment and medication. All the basics that are supposed to be afforded by the able-bodied and everyone else. You would find that persons with disabilities are left out. And it is my appeal and submission that as we plan and as we advocate, we also don't forget these particular vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Paulina, for that intervention. Any hand? May we have the screen, the presentation removed on the screen? Secretariat. Thank you. Any more hands?
You have Seychelles,
Yes,
Honorable
yes,
Chair,
now
and
I
you
can
also
see
have
them. Honorable Ruiz, you may take the floor.
I'm very appreciative.
Okay, Honorable Rosie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, SG. Good afternoon, all honorable members. I would like to ask, well, sort of, not questions, but really, but clarifications in regards to pool procurement within the region, especially when it comes to generic medicines. And according to the presentations, there are some flexibilities that has been discussed. And I know there has not been some ease of distribution or procurement within the region. Then secondly, I would like to know what will be the issue in regards to because when we discussed about especially the rollout of the vaccination programs, and it was discussed mostly for low-income countries. And I know within the SADC region, we have high-income countries like Seychelles, and there a possibility of the high-income countries to be supported as well with the TRIPS, because we have sort of harmonized our laws, IPs, to sort of to include the TRIPS. So whether the high-income countries will be supported as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Rose, for that, for your question and also your intervention. Do we have some more hands? Yes, Honorable Regina, I recognize you. Then we take one more.
Thank you, Madam. I would just like to know, last year, we discussed in our parliament about the AMA. AMA is the African Medicine Treaty. Maybe it would be good to know how many countries have adopted the treaty, because this treaty is a good tool that helps to establish the African Medicine Agency. And by getting this treaty on board and domesticating it, it would help a lot of African countries to get access to good medicine, because we have the problem of accessibility and the problem of availability, which are two key elements on the African country which we lack. Maybe by getting the AMA treaty, getting the African countries, especially countries in the Southern Africa, to pass this treaty, to, how do you say? To discuss this treaty in the national parliament, it would be good to have them as a tool to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable. I cannot see any more hands. Nyasha and Eunice, may you respond to those?
We're going to legislate protocol, that's what national legislate.
Thank you. I can respond to that. So thank you, Honorable Porina. I think with regards to access to medicines, you've highlighted the disability group. I think it's a very valid point.
Mr. T.
Hello.
Lekai.
How are you?
I'm
good. I wanted to.
Secretariat, mute, please.
And basically, I think, yes, and the disabilities group cannot be ignored. And also there are special requirements with regards to the disability needs and stuff. So when we speak essential medicines, that's applicable to everyone. It's not just applicable to the fully healthy, able-bodied people. It's applicable to even cardiovascular, oncology, cervical cancer. So whatever is the essential priority that goes under the basket of essential medicines, and it not only focus on medicines, it focus on devices, on diagnostics, on vaccines, so all of that. But thank you for that point. So the Honorable Rosie mentioned pool procurement and the support from not just the least developed countries. So when you speak about pool procurement, that's applicable to every country, not just whether you are a low middle income country or high income country. It's applicable to all countries, because procurement cooperation is only useful when we pool together the demand, and when that demand can be used as leverage for the supply, that's when you're creating efficiencies on supply, on distribution, on contracting, on manufacturing relationships as well. So where SADC stands on pool procurement, there has been a pool procurement strategy officially adopted by each SADC member state in 2012. There has been project implementations of that. The database I spoke about was one of those developments. And as we stand, there is a SADC pool procurement strategy in place for establishing an entity to manage and coordinate all of these items there. So the role of high income countries with regard, so yes, if you are a low middle income country, you are exempt from the TRIPS flexibilities, but your high income country is got a huge role as well. I mean, when you speak about regional cooperation and we speak about leveraging the demand, and yes, updating your IP flexibilities as well within your national legislation, that's a huge step, because it also means you are controlling the patenting. You are not just have patents for your essential items. And then you've seen examples of countries, high developed countries, who have lobbied WTO for exemption from patenting, and that puts you in a position to do that and to promote your own local production as well. And then when you look at the Honorable Regina mentioned the AMA and the treaty and the adoption rate. The AMA, I think thus far the latest information which we have was showing that quite a few countries, there's about 17 countries have signed out. There are, I think, about a minimum of 15 member states who needed to ratify it. But it's also been recently, I mean, it's been discussed and planned, but it's been recently launched in February. And aside from the AMA, I think an important step that has been done at the SADC level was the adoption of the regulatory standard, because the bottleneck for regulatory processes has been the national regulatory authorities and the process that each medicine has to go through for application. And in 2012, between 2012 and 2014, each SADC member state adopted a common technical document format, and that was a huge step for regulatory harmonization. And there's a successful project that's been implemented called Zazibona, which means that eventually when a product is sent for regulatory evaluation and approval in one SADC country, it does not have to repeat the process in each SADC country. It's automatically granted evaluation approval. And that is the harmonization move there as well. And the AMA aims to achieve the same thing there. So yeah, I take the point of access and availability. So when we speak about TRIPS flexibilities, I would say TRIPS flexibilities focuses on access. When we speak about availability, availability speaks to your procurement cooperation, your local production, your regional cooperation. And that's why they go together. So exactly like what I mentioned in the presentation, access and availability goes together because both of them touch on those core elements to improve access to healthcare ultimately. Thank you.
Is Nyasha coming in?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think the one I might just want to touch on was the first question around access for all and equitable access at national level on the rollout programs. And I think that point absolutely resonates with me. I think at the moment we are all hearing about an international campaign around vaccines for all globally. And I think the point that the honorable member was raising is an important one around the role that parliamentarians can play in ensuring access at national level, being access for all, and ensuring that vulnerable members of communities that might otherwise be forgotten are actually included. And this, of course, becomes a role that can be the role as community representatives that members can play in ensuring that even in the rollout plans, we are ensuring that there is access for all in a manner that is actually really take into account the vulnerable groups in our midst. And then, Madam Chair, just because I heard you say that we'll only take one round of questions, I just wanted to also highlight that although, of course, our key agenda in this intervention was around the intellectual property interventions, to just highlight that there are a few other important issues for honorable members to really take into cognizance as the vaccine rollouts happen in our countries. One of the key things that we are seeing is issues around transparency and just not having enough information from a community perspective on rollout plans, on where vaccines are coming from, on prices that our governments have paid for the vaccines that they have received via bilateral agreements, and those kinds of things. And therefore, just to highlight that important oversight function of members during this time around transparency and ensuring that there is access to information for communities during this time. Tying into that issue of access to information, just also around access to comprehensive information around COVID as a pandemic and as a disease, but vaccines in particular. We are seeing a lot of conspiracy theories going around in our countries. And there is an obligation on our states to ensure access to accurate information for our communities in all geographical and socioeconomic areas. And so it is important for us to also just be cognizant of our own efforts to ensure that we are holding our member states to account in terms of access to information and in terms of comprehensive information, but also as the vaccines roll out, in ensuring that this information is also tied to informed consent around vaccination of communities. While it is extremely important for us to encourage all members of communities to get vaccinated, I think we are also seeing in some countries challenges around potential human rights violations. And so being able to balance out that public health need to ensure vaccines to as many people as possible with the rights concerns around informed consent for medical processes and procedures. So I just wanted to highlight those in case I don't have a chance, because they're not necessarily IP related. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Honorable Richard, are you raising your hand? Or it just, all right. Honorable members, we now move to our last.
Yes.
You are raising your hand.
Yes.
I
have a question regarding the traditional medicine that Madagascar was manufacturing since last year. It was a very great advertisement. My question, countries associate, what not give Madagascar great support regarding this? What is the main issue? Great support regarding this. What is the main issue? I just want to know that.
Nyasha, a quick one. He was breaking. I didn't get much of his question, but we can, if you are able to answer it within a minute.
I also missed it, Honorable Chair, and I will actually defer it to Yunus when he hears it, but from his face, I can tell he also missed it.
All right.
I can do a quick one. I think I understood, if I'm correct, with regards to Madagascar manufacturing the local tea. I think you were referring to the COVID one. So, look, the ultimate, I think the status on that, and I'll stand to be corrected, is whether it has been proven or not to be efficacious, which will result in clinical trials and non-clinical data and a lot of information. So, and that is, I think that is exactly where the focus needs to be when you speak about traditional medicine. So it's pointless saying, okay, we've done this and this is shown to be working, but we need to be in a position where we can back it up with data. And that puts us into a position then to say, okay, now this can be locally produced and it has these things. So it's not to say that these things don't work, but when you then have to promote it and say, okay, here it is, and it's got these data, we need to back it up with data. And the technology transfer, and that's where a good role can come in, because there are countries who have capability to ensure clinical data to assist in that product developing further. And sometimes it might take a different format in it, but the technology transfer and the information sharing, the data bank of traditional medicines is exactly where we need to go into. And that's, I think, a step in the right direction to develop that further.
Thank you so much, Eunice, for that response. Honorable members, we now go to our last presentation, which is on the role of parliamentarians. The role parliamentarians play to advance access to COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, and diagnostic. Presenters, may we request you that you, sorry for that, you do it quickly so that we don't run out of time. We are supposed to finish at 2. You may take the floor.
We've done that in one presentation already for you.
Oh, that's the same one.
Yes.
All right. On my program, it looks separate.
Yeah, no, it was separate.
Okay.
For the interest of time, we just combined it.
All right. Thank you so much. Honorable members, do we have anything else before we go for the way forward? Thank you so much, honorable members and our presenters, our partners. On the way forward, let me just say that all issues that have been discussed in this meeting will be in the report, and this will be compiled and it will be presented to the plenary. Madam SG, before I call upon Chair to give closing remarks, may I request you if you have anything to say before we close the meeting.
Oh, Chair, thank you very much for that opportunity. Just to appreciate the depth of the discussions, and I think all of us are able to also realize that there are others that we need to explore further. And the Secretariat will be ready to receive any more requests from the various committees who would like to link the topics for today with our mandate. I think that would be good. And lastly, Honorable Chair, let me just say the impact of COVID-19 on the legislature should be looked at in terms of how our government should lead in ensuring that there is a universal access for all. And I think one of the issues that members of parliament should look at is the whole issue of the supply chain. Are we able to reach everybody else, even those who are in the far-flung areas of our countries? Those are issues for accountability at constituency level that we must be able to look at. And I believe that we must continue to lead increasingly to make our constituents aware and look at issues of health security, which seems to be coming up from the media. You are in a privileged position to find out what are the critical issues that our governments are grappling with, and be the interface to ensure that our region is secure, that if there are issues that are required for development of any vaccine within the region, that such calls for investment into a vaccine, for a vaccine or manufacturing of a vaccine in the region should really be embraced and something that is really discussed in Parliament. I believe that some of the issues may not find their way for consultation, given most of our countries are having a hybrid way of operating in dealing with the issue of COVID. But I believe that where there's a strong demand for this vaccine, honorable members, let us be at the center of this immunization process in terms of coverage of gaps that remain, in terms of ensuring security of the products, and in terms of ensuring that your constituents are widely informed about what is going on. This puts us at the center of what is the knowledge that is required for our members of parliament in this epidemic. The pace of technology and innovation demands that we also should ensure that we expose our members of parliament to some of these issues. I think the other issue is the scale of information that is coming out in terms of, the bioreactors, or what needs to be done to ensure that at the end of the day, there's a business case for informing our people whether or not we must be looking at vaccines being developed in the region, and that we create a supportive environment for all of us to feel safe and feel we have our representatives speaking for us in Parliament, that at no point will we feel there was a shift or there was a shortage of any political commitment from our leaders. I wish you well, honorable members. Let us steer the whole issue of local vaccine manufacturing. Let us steer the whole issue of regionalization and integration of vaccines, including looking at markets across the continent. Through your accountability, I believe that this will assist us further. And taking a leap, the African Continental Free Trade Area also promises greater harmonization of our markets. And I believe the issue of medicines in this area will yield results for us to look at the regional economic communities and see how they can help. With these, honorable members, an enabling environment is required. Building a sustainable vaccine industry in the region is an issue which you must be seized with. and lead us. I thank you, honorable members.
Thank you so much, Madam SG, for those remarks. I'm sure as honorable members who are representing the rural mass and also the urban masses in our constituencies, we are going to make sure that we represent them well and they have access to all what we have discussed today. And may I now call upon the chair for democracy and governance and human rights to make closing remarks. Thank you so much, honorable members.
Chair, thank you very much. I'll have the honor of standing in the place of our chair. Honorable members, the Secretary General of SADC-PF, distinguished resource persons from the UNFPA, UNICEF, ARASA, and SAPM, and members of the Secretariat. I'm honored to be delivering the closing remarks as we conclude this joint sitting of the SADC-PF Standing Committee session for the 49th Plenary Assembly, which will be hosted by the Parliament of Botswana in June this year. As we mark over a year of COVID-19 on the continent, we have witnessed the importance of keeping sexual and reproductive health and rights at the top of the agenda to prevent and respond effectively to gender-based violence, child marriages, and teenage pregnancies. The immediate impacts of COVID-19 on women, girls, and young people will also have long-term impacts that threaten the RCPD agenda and the attainment of the SDGs. This highlights the urgency for us to take action collectively to ensure that they are not left behind. As parliamentarians, we are the bridge between the people and government and are instruments in advocating for the rights and needs of the people. We play a key role in supporting policies, legislative and accountability frameworks of governments. Today, we heard from experts about the impact that the advocacy and legislative efforts parliamentarians have made to utilize the SADC model law on child marriage, to strengthen national legislation to end child marriage in your respective countries. Much has already been done thanks to your efforts. However, COVID-19 threatens to reverse the gains that we have made and underscores the urgency of scaling up our partnerships and collaboration to end child marriage in Southern Africa. On behalf of SADC-PF standing committees, I welcome the gesture and commitment by the UNFPA and UNICEF and other partners who are pledging continued support and collaboration to work together with parliamentarians in their critical advocacy and political roles to advance work on child marriage, even in the midst of a global pandemic, as part of our collective efforts to work towards a more equal future and building back better. Our contribution in this advocacy role is towards establishing an enabling environment which will assist SADC countries to harness the flexibilities afforded by trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, to respond to the various communicable and non-communicable disease public health concerns. Before COVID-19, we have already faced HIV, TB, malaria, and other diseases. However, the situation of providing equitable access to health remains a challenge. It is important that now more than ever, we remain committed and engaged, using the tools and resources available to focus on intellectual property rights and their impacts on access to medicines. The valuable role of parliamentarians in advocating for intellectual property legislation and policies to facilitate access to medicines has been demonstrated yet. These efforts must continue. Our governments have committed to SDGs, but we all share responsibility for this. As parliamentarians, we need to use our role, including oversight, to ensure that the targets outlined in the SDGs are met and that relevant national governments and policies are in place and are implemented to promote fair and equitable access to medicines for all. At this juncture, I declare the meeting closed. I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, bon appétit.
Muito obrigado.
Muito bem.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sechi.
Bye.
Bye.
Bon appétit tout le monde. Hein?
Bye. Merci.
Bon appétit. Bye bye.
Bye
Bye
bye.
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 Bye bye.
Honorable
We
Richard,
miss
bye.
you all.
Miss you too, Madam SG.
Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.
Bye bye. I'm
See you
gonna
from paradise.
continue.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Kindly switch off, Ronald.